Hi, my name is Derek Barber and I'm from Homestead T.O. And we are all about teaching Torontonians to grow their own food and bringing them closer to the food that they eat. Find out more about us on our website at homesteadto.com or on social media through Homestead T.O. Teach through an organization called Homestead T.O, where we teach people really to grow food in their, just anywhere at home and in small urban farms. And so what we're trying to do is we're just trying to, number one, bring Torontonians closer to their food. You get so many examples where basically people have no idea where food comes from beyond the grocery store. Everybody can name 5 grocery stores, 5 restaurants, but nobody can name 5 farmers. And that's, we're just trying to bring people closer, to the actual farming community, but also just wherever possible, get them growing in their own backyards, front yards, balconies, countertops, anywhere possible. And ideally, what we're also trying to do is we're trying to just kind of feed people into the different urban agriculture organizations. So you got all these entities that are actually growing food within the city. They cannot find people. There's just kind of a lack of expertise in Toronto. So we're trying to create that expertise, and we do that by just we operate basically a full season. It's a 7-month program where students will come in and they will, as a group, plan, plant, maintain, and harvest their own team garden, and they get to bring everything home. We're going to take those 7 months and try to compress it into 90 minutes.
Awesome.
So should be easy, right? So what we're going to do today is we're going to just talk briefly about garden planning. Basically what it is and what you're trying to do with garden planning. It's not just choosing your favorite vegetables, it's choosing the ones that are most likely to succeed. We're going to go, then kind of use that information and start talking about plant needs, because when you're planning your own garden, it should stem from kind of what you want to harvest from the garden, but it should mostly stem from what your garden is going to be able to produce in the first place. So we'll just kind of look at what do plants need in order to grow and in order to produce a harvest for you. We'll then go through what does your typical garden already have, because the biggest part of garden planning is really reconciling what each individual plant needs with what your garden can already provide for it without you having to kind of do everything. Next, we're going to start going through using this information, drawing your own plot, choosing your crops, and using a lot of that information to actually turn that into a garden plan. And Lindsay's going to be doing that live, basically building a bit of a garden plan here, just using the technique we're going to go through. We'll go through, we'll place the plants with that, go through a couple of quick things. We already talked, briefly about companion planting, matching the right things up, side by side, and then crop rotation as well. And then we're also going to introduce the concept of succession planting. This is going to be important, especially in a place like Toronto, where we've got a distinct spring season, a distinct summer season, and a distinct fall season. A lot of people would think of that as a challenge, and I suppose it is. But if you can put the right crops kind of successively after one another, you're trying to go for 3 different harvests from every spot in your garden in order to just kind of maximize your own activity level, but also, of course, maximize the harvest. So, it all starts with what is garden planning? Garden planning is, it's easy. It's the equation of essentially just trying to get the maximum harvest from your garden with the minimum amount of work. Fairly simple. And you make that actually happen by essentially having Mother Nature do all of the work for you wherever possible. That is a lot easier in kind of a backyard setting like this, where you've got different zones, some kind of shadier zones, some full sun zones. You've got different, there's a little bit of a slope here, so you've got different access to water and whatnot. If you can match the plant up to its ideal spot in the garden, it becomes a little more possible. If you're growing on a container, on like a countertop or on a balcony, it's a little less difficult, because then you've got, a little more difficult, because then you've got your own, you've got less kind of nature working for you, and you as a gardener are doing most of the work. So, everything we're talking about is relative. You're just kind of trying to set yourself up for success and just have, put your plants in the right spot and beside the right other plants to make things work. But let's start with, what do plants actually need to grow successfully in the first place?
Water. Love, good one.
Love is...
Water, love, and sun. That's it. And nutrients.
That's
Okay, sure.
But there's 6 basic things that every plant needs, in addition to love. Basically every plant needs, of course, sunlight. Every plant needs carbon dioxide, and every plant needs water. Those are the basic inputs to photosynthesis. And do you guys know, what does photosynthesis do for the plant? What's the output of photosynthesis?
Green.
Isn't it when the sun, like this, you take the energy from the sun and the plant converts it into energy that it can use
Yeah.
to grow?
That's exactly it. The output is essentially carbon dioxide. Carbohydrates. So basically you get energy from the sun plus carbon dioxide plus water gives you carbohydrates, and it's kind of cool
Really?
because
Carbohydrates.
you know
Very. Sorry, I just had a whole
Sugars.
aha thing happening there. Very
Sugars are
interesting.
carbohydrates.
Sorry.
Sugars are
Yes, I just
Yep.
didn't think of them in
Sugars.
plants.
The building blocks.
Right. Plants are the same as us. Oh.
You couldn't live without plants.
Or bees. I am not sick. I just have asthma, so please don't freak out.
only because we were surprised. Basically, this is carbon dioxide. 6
Right.
units of CO2, 6 units of H2O, and energy from the sun gets converted to 1 unit of C6H12O6, which is glucose, and
Plus.
and 6 units of
Wow.
O2.
Okay.
So that's carbon dioxide. So this is one of the cool things about plants. This is how they feed themselves. Basically we are able to just go and we eat the plants. Essentially, is how we feed ourselves. Plants can mostly feed themselves. This is basically all the carbohydrates they need, and this is about 95% of all the calories plants need are from those 3
It's
things.
just from the.
Yeah. I'll get
That's
rid of
how
the heavy
that
duty
stuff
science from
just
here.
comes up like the food.
Separately.
Where are you coming
This is 95% of what plants need. What about the other 5%?
Nitrogen, phosphorus.
Yep. Nutrients, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. There's 17 kind of known nutrients where we know what the nutrients are, and we know what they do for the plants. And the cool thing is, and we won't get into this in the next kind of hour or so, but if you kind of know what each nutrient does for the plants, you can basically choose the right fertilizer to drive growth where you want it. So earlier on in the season, you're just saying, I want longer roots, I want bigger leaves. But then later on, when you, as the plant matures, you basically look at what you want to harvest from the plant, and you can put the right nutrient that's going to increase the size of that. You're going to basically point the plant's energy towards what you want to harvest, which is perfect. So it needs that. It needs oxygen. Plants need oxygen the same way we do. So they're not breathing in the carbon dioxide. That's loosely, it's what they eat. They breathe in oxygen, and oxygen combines with carbon dioxide. With carbohydrates, and that's what powers their cells. That's what goes on in the mitochondria in the cells. That's what basically leads to plant growth. The exact same way it does with humans. And then the last thing they need, all plants need, is the right temperature. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but basically there's cool crops and there's hot crops, and each of them, every plant has its own ideal temperature range. So basically, all plants need the right combination of those. And then some plants will also need a few other things. Like there's some plants are going to need pollinators. Not as many plants need pollinators as we think. Most plants do, not most, many plants do self-pollinate. So we can kind of talk a little bit about those, but some need pollinators. Some also need, kind of a trellising or support. There's other, basic needs of plants, and these are kind of specific to individual plants. But essentially, all plants definitely need these top 6. So in any garden plan, what you're trying to do is basically just look at the need of that plant. Some combination of these 6 plus the other items, versus where it already exists in your garden. The interesting thing, though, is, and this is one of the most important parts about gardening, is essentially these two, largely come from the air. These, especially in spring and fall, temperature, is both the air temperature and soil temperature matters. But these largely come from the soil. Certainly at this time of year, it's soil temperature you're more worried about. So basically, one of the key things of gardening is getting your soil right, because the majority of what the plants are going to be using is going to come from the soil. So that's going to be one of the key things. And then we'll talk about essentially how to incorporate the other basic needs of plants. The hard part, though, is it's easy to basically just say every plant needs these 6 or more things. But the hard part is different plants need different amounts of those. And how do you know what plant needs what? Well, the best place to start is usually the seed packet itself. Sunlight is usually kind of divided. You'll see basically full sun, part shade. Very rarely you'll see full shade, but you're kind of looking at the seed packet for that. Same thing, kind of water and nutrients. The seed packet will basically just say plant in well draining soil or plant in fertile soil, or for cucumbers it'll say water consistently, and you look for clues in that regard. But in a lot of cases it also goes by the plant family. So if you know your plant families, it helps. But even easier than that, if you know what part of that plant you harvest, then you've usually got kind of a good indication of what that plant needs. If you're harvesting the fruit of the plant, the root of the plant, or to a lesser, or the seeds or the flowers, or to a lesser degree the stems of the plant, those are usually full sun plants. A couple of there's exceptions to everything, like something like snap peas, where you're kind of eating the fruit technically, doesn't need maybe quite as much sunlight. But but there's always exceptions. But for the most part, if you're eating those parts of the plant, full sun is the way to go. If you're eating the leaves of a plant, then part sun, part shade is usually the way to go. And so you learn more if you're basically same thing on nutrients and oxygen level. If you're eating the fruit of the plant or the root of the plant, it probably requires more nutrients than average. If you're eating the leaves of a plant, it's probably a low feed, it requires less nutrients. So look at the seed packet, but also just kind of build an understanding of the links between the part of the plant we actually harvest and eat and what they need. And you'll find a lot of consistencies by plant part, by plant family, or you can go individually. But individually it's complex, because there's you might plant 100 vegetables in your time. Those 100 vegetables are going to be from about 8, 9, 10 plant families. So that's a lot easier. But even easier than that, it's going to be from 6 plant parts. So it's easier if you can basically just kind of memorize the parts,
your root
the roots, the stem
your,
vegetables,
right.
the
flowering things.
Exactly.
Yeah, right, okay.
And
That's very interesting. That's a really good way to look at it.
It simplifies your life so much. And there's exceptions, of course, but not that many. So a big part is essentially just understanding what plants need, and then from that, understanding what your garden can already provide. So again, in a countertop garden, essentially there's really nothing natural other than the plant itself going on, in that container. There's no
Sunlight,
nature.
depending on the weather.
Yeah, you might, but even now we don't get as much sunlight. Like we see humans, we see the light coming through. Plants they don't want light. They want the UVA and UVB rays,
right.
which our windows are designed to filter out. So it becomes difficult. That's why if you're growing indoors, usually you want grow lights. Unless you've got, the perfect situation. If you've got that south or southwest window with the old school glass, that's perfect. Oh, that's I'm jealous.
I have lots of plants there, but no food.
Yeah, but if you've got these new, kind of the new glass
right.
that is designed to filter all these out, the plant is getting light, but it's not getting the right energy from light that it needs. And that's one of the challenges. So you often, in many cases, unless you get a really low light plant in there, like just herbs or small leafy greens,
right.
you need to supplement that light.
Right.
No water will get into that container that you didn't put in. No nutrients can get into that container that you didn't put in. You don't have a whole lot of kind of microbes working away and breaking down the minerals in the soil to create nutrients for the plants. You're responsible for all those nutrients. Whereas when you're in a backyard like this, you've got all sorts of different features. So you've got basically, sunlight is, of course, everywhere, but you've got kind of more full sun areas over here that we're going to experience shortly. And you've got part shade areas over here. So you can kind of start to build the links there. Carbon dioxide is virtually everywhere. Unless you run a huge greenhouse in the winter, you will never run short of carbon dioxide. Water is interesting. Water is from the sun, from the clouds, of course, but you can also get water from that downspout there. You extend the downspout to wherever you need. Note that if you're going to be, doing this, extending the downspout, know your shingles. A lot of shingles have chemicals in them, asphalt, something like that. So if you don't trust your shingles, which, typically you shouldn't, doesn't mean you can't use the water, but it just means you want to build a buffer in between. Like just kind of, extend the downspout to a little bit shy of your vegetable garden, and then put a rain garden or put up a small pollinator or tractor garden in there, which is something that's going to filter the water. And the water will gradually percolate through the soil, and it's going to make its way over to your vegetable garden. And you can kind of trust that essentially anything closer to that downspout is going to have access to more water without you adding it manually yourself than anything away from the downspout. also you've got the benefit of slopes. If you've got a small slope, you know basically something here is going to the soil here should be naturally damper than the soil there. So it's so much is just kind of going through the list and just kind of saying, what can my plant or my garden kind of provide for me to those plants? Nutrients. Your main thing is going to be are there any kind of side areas where you've got kind of little hedgerows that are going to be willing to or able to share nutrients with your plants? So there's a whole kind of mycorrhizal concept where basically plants will share nutrients with each other through the fungi in the soil. And you can get that through creating hedgerows somewhere. Your more kind of nutrient-rich soil is usually in the downhill parts of your garden. So again, when it rains and the water kind of pools in the low area, it's pulling a few nutrients with it as well. So your higher up areas are better draining, but they're also less fertile. So your garden can provide that for you. Oxygen. How do you kind of find that in your garden? Well, mostly oxygen is found in the soil, at least as it's taken in by plants. It's taken in through plant roots. And again, oxygen is kind of a big growth driver. That's kind of the gas pedal for plants when they grow. They take the carbohydrates produced through photosynthesis, combine it with oxygen, and that powers cell growth or cell division, which then of course powers plant growth. Your oxygen is going to be found more so in kind of loose soil and more so in dry soil. Whenever it rains, the water is essentially pushing out the air pockets. And also, whenever you let kind of your clay compact in the soil, if you've got basically clay is kind of the smallest mineral particle, and these clay particles tend to combine together and it compacts into something kind of brick-like. There's not room for a whole lot of oxygen in there. So what I'd stress on that for a lot of these things is just know your soil. And if you've got an area where it's basically you've got kind of loose, what's called friable soil, you can trust there's going to be a lot of oxygen in there. If you've got wet or really compacted clay heavy soil, you're not going to have much oxygen in there. So you have to choose plants that don't need as much oxygen, which are going to be the really small plants or brassicas, surprisingly. Anything in the cabbage or mustard family, they can survive in clay heavy soil. A lot of grasses can as well.
Grasses, yeah.
Temperature. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but just know that in your typical outdoor garden, you've got just kind of microclimates, and your full sun areas are going to be hotter, of course, than your kind of less sunny areas, but also your late day sun areas. The hot sun, the red and far red light waves on the light spectrum, those are in the kind of the sunlight that comes after 3 p.m. That morning sun is called cool sun. So if you've got plants that what are called cool crops, and we'll go into those in a bit, you don't have to just put them in the shadier areas of your garden. You can put them in the the areas like along a western fence where it's going to be it's going to get that eastern sunlight. And if you've got the heat lovers, the peppers, the tomatoes, the cucumbers, you can put them along your eastern fence, and it's going to get all the really hot sunlight from later in the day.
That's a very cool piece of information.
Yeah.
I think I sort of intrinsically knew that because of how I have things planned, but I really never thought that morning sun was just not as hot as the afternoon sun.
Yeah, it's there's less energy. It's a different light wave. You know how you in the old school grow lights you get the blue and the red.
Yeah.
Blue is your morning sunlight.
Right.
Red is your late day
Cool.
sunlight.
Yeah.
And so those it gives you a little bit of both.
Fascinating.
Yeah, but it also drives temperature as well.
Right.
So the cool crops, which are usually crops where you're harvesting the leaves,
Like lettuces, spinach.
yeah, get those as much
Kales.
morning sunlight as possible, and you'll end up with smaller leaves. To be clear, you don't get the you see those really big, beautiful chard leaves. Those were grown in western sunlight, but that's the chard that you would saute. The chard you put in salads is the one that's grown in the eastern sunlight. Smaller leaves,
Well,
and
that's
it's really
funny. I
tender.
have 2 lettuces growing now as of yesterday, and one is got eastern from seed, and the other is western from starts. So
Okay. Yep. Yeah. You'll actually
fascinating.
get to
It's
look
all
at it.
very fascinating.
Yeah. And then also your garden will have kind of natural trellising. We've got a whole bunch along this fence line here, for example. You could run trellising up sheds, up the sides of houses. You want to kind of look at pollinator attractors. You're just kind of looking for usually native wildflowers are the best. But what I want you to do is just, if you know what your plants need in general to survive, and ideally your specific plants need, what they need to survive, you can get to the point where you can basically think of your garden as an inventory of all of these things. Because different parts of this garden have different elements of this. As and different plants need different amounts of that, and so much of garden planning is really kind of the matching process. So where does it all start? Well, what we got to do now, we've got the baseline knowledge. Now we've got to get to the point of actually trying to incorporate that into a garden map. Basically this inventory of what we can provide. We're going to turn that into basically a map of the garden that we want to plant. And for here, I'm going to put the garden owner on the spot. And what we want to do is essentially draw out the garden. And when you're drawing out your garden, a lot of it is just, what are my planting zones? What are the dimensions? The usual things that you would expect to put into a garden plan. But a lot of it is that inventory of all the different features. Access to water, and the water, there's two elements of that. There's the, kind of everybody, all areas of the garden are going to get rainfall. Some will get more benefit of the rainfall because they're either closer to the downspout or they're, just in the more kind of low-lying zones. Some are going to get less access to water because they're on a slope or at the top of a hill or something like that. So you can see, oh no.
No, I have to look at it. I have to go down the other end of the garden to look at it.
So it's
something like that.
It's hard. There's a reason why you don't want me drawing this. The parents said I would make a really great doctor based on my writing. But also on that, you've already got the one thing, you need kind of the north indicator as well, because what you're trying to do is just kind of gauge amounts of sunlight and also the type of sunlight. Are you getting the cool light or the hot light in there? So you need this indicator. Actually, related to water, one good kind of piece of info is just knowing where your hose is as well. Because unless you set up this whole kind of drip line type system, we do that at the farm, but in a typical backyard, you might do a sprinkler, you might do a soaker hose, but in a lot of cases it's old school, just kind of running out and watering. And over time you're going to find if you can put the plants that either need to stay cool or are going to need more water closer to the tap, it saves you a lot of work, basically over the whole kind of growing season. So you want to factor that in as well. Any slopes, of course, you want to factor in. I love having just like this is a great slope. It's just kind of a small slope. If it was a little bit steeper, it'd be better. Because slopes give you access to just different growing conditions. Higher up the slope, of course, better draining, more oxygen, and in some cases more sunlight as well. But also further up a slope gives you just a little bit of protection from things like frost, from things like morning dew. And morning dew, not a big deal, but during early blight season and during powdery mildew season, knowing the areas that get a little less of that morning dew is gold. It's going to buy you a couple of extra weeks before the powdery mildew kind of comes in and takes a go at all of your cucumbers and your squash plants and that sort of thing.
I gave up on those just because of the damn powdery mildew.
Yeah, but at least powdery mildew, it's basically on a schedule, which helps.
Yeah,
It's usually around
I
the
didn't
third
know
week of
anything
July.
about it, and I just tried to fix it, and it killed it.
Could you
No.
repeat how to avoid the powder dew, the timing?
Yeah, so if so powdery mildew usually there's two elements that drive it. Number one is the fungus itself that creates powdery mildew. Every year that fungus, and then the same conversation for early blight. They're very similar. Basically, the fungus comes in. It does this thing to our plants. It cannot survive Canadian winters. Winters have to be good for something, right? So it's they die every year. But then they kind of sweep in. They come in from the south in the wind. It's basically the fungal spores are in the air, and they'll usually arrive in kind of July, sometime around then, and they basically are just looking for the right home. They usually get on plants in one of two ways. Number one is basically it's in the air, and they like kind of slightly damp conditions. They usually like temperatures kind of 18 to 22 degrees. Which unfortunately kind of describes every single morning from the second half of July through kind of the end of August. Basically, we get the nighttime lows, and in the morning the sun comes out, and it's that perfect temperature. You get the morning dew, and it's that perfect just little bit of dampness, and the powdery mildew just kind of lands on the leaves, and it's perfect from them. So if you can basically plant the things that are more susceptible to powdery mildew, in the kind of higher areas, if you can put them in containers, for example, they're going to get less morning dew. Separately, the other way powdery mildew gets on your plants, probably more common way, is that it lands in the soil. It'll land at the plant leaf. If the plant leaf is dry, it'll drop to soil and it'll just be on the soil. And next time it rains, it splashes up. So any plants that are susceptible to powdery mildew, and these are the cucumbers, zucchini, most types of squash, mulch underneath them. And if you can basically put wood chips or something like that, or straw, not hay, but straw underneath them, then basically it just prevents the splash up when it rains. And then some spores are still going to get on your plant leaves, and it just lessens it. You'll never avoid powdery mildew. You're just trying to defer it a little bit, and it just buys you a little more time to harvest.
Can you get rid of it if you get
can
it?
reduce it. The best way to reduce it is to alkalinize the leaf surfaces, which means raise the pH.
Right.
So it's basically you just do a spray. Some people use milk. Some people, I use a spray of just a
Read
spray
about
bottle of
that
water,
milk,
a couple drops of liquid soap, and then a teaspoon of baking soda.
Yeah,
Neem oil helps a little bit. I don't use neem oil myself, but it does work. I use would alkalinize things, but neem oil is an anti-fungicide.
Neem? Canada?
Spraying compost tea helps.
Yeah, what compost? So it's another. These are great because it's so neem oil is an antifungal agent and it reduces the funguses. Again, it will not eliminate it. There's just so much powdery mildew in the air that time of year, but it reduces it, so it buys you more time. And then same thing. Compost tea, how it does it, you put a whole lot of beneficial microbes on your leaves by spraying with compost tea, and the beneficial microbes initially will crowd out the bad microbes, which in this case are the powdery mildew fungi or the early blight fungi.
So that's coming from fungus in the air.
Yep, and you can't avoid it. You just minimize
I
it
had
and
mine
push it back.
in 5-gallon pails
so that's
and with trellises, and it just died.
Yeah, if you
I got one
elevate as much as
perfect
possible.
zucchini.
Yeah.
Can
Oh.
I just remove the leaves when I see?
It helps you if you remove the leaves a little bit at first. One key thing, so that we're getting into the weeds on this. I want to get back to this, but I'll tell you this: if you remove the leaves, especially on things like zucchini plants or cucumber plants, you know how when you cut the leaves, they're hollow, right? If you cut it right at the vine, it's not hollow. So you just cut it really close to the vine and it's solid. And the difference is you're trying to reduce the surface area that's exposed after the cut, because the spores, they're in the air, they will get on that surface. So just cut it right at the vine, and you'll know you did it perfectly if it's not hollow where you cut it. So you can prune that, and that does help. So we should talk more about that. There'll be lots of time for Q&A at the end. So now we'll just start with, this is essentially our garden. If you want to just quickly walk us through, and then just kind of access to what we want to do is identify. So we got water. We want to identify the kind of sunnier areas versus the part shade areas.
Yeah, so just to orientation, we're kind of looking that way. So north is this way here, and this row of beds is along this side here. I would say that maybe this area of the yard is the full sunniest part of the yard.
So this is a future garden, I guess.
Maybe. We do get still mostly full sun conditions. Then as we go this way, we get more and more shady conditions. We're not trying to grow anything on this side of the garage, but this little space in here too, it's what Derek was saying before, it gets really nice morning light. The only problem is there's so much gravel in the soil that I'm not sure we're going to be able to do much along here, but it does get the morning light. So
You could do pots.
we could do something.
You could do pots or something,
Yeah.
Yep.
time,
Nice
light,
gravel.
Time.
Fresh.
Or dig the whole thing out and.
This zone here, yeah, it's too shady almost for too much, especially on the other side of the tree. So yeah, that's kind of the darkest zone ranging to the brightest, and then.
And do we want to mark it down like we can use like full sun or FS or
Sure.
part shade, and just kind of just mention that, and we'll use that shortly. Perfect. And then lastly, kind of in terms of soil type, what we've got on the grass itself is a slight slope. I'm not seeing the slope necessarily in the beds at the side. It seemed kind of the bottom seems to be here. But one thing I am seeing is over there you've built up. You've added is that potting mix or is that just kind of a lot of compost to just build up the soil?
It's compost. Yeah, I don't think we added too much else to the beds.
So we've got two things over there. Number one is we've got kind of looser soil, which is going to be better draining for those plants that prefer it. And we've also got protection. If we've got certain plants that we know are more susceptible to rodents in this case, as a raccoon rodent. The rodents and raccoons will say.
There's rats. There are rats.
That's
Came
kind of
up from
good to know.
downtown.
So we can put those on because that's going to we'll be able to use that information as well. So just kind of the looser soil, and then that'll help us kind of position things.
So how deep is that? I guess that's just right into the ground depth. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like it's.
But-
I have to stick a fork in there to be sure, but it looks like it'll. You can.
It's
You
not bad.
You got 8, 10, 12 inches or
You know,
something? Or?
maybe 8.
Okay. All right. That's not bad. Yeah, that's the hard part. In Toronto, in most places you've got kind of a clay pan underneath. So you've got basically, a little bit of topsoil, then a hard clay pan underneath. And if you can get like 8 or so, inches of space, of actual topsoil before you hit the clay pan, you can grow almost anything in that.
This
think
is
you've got-
very sandy soil.
Okay. Was this a former creek bed or something? Or
I
is
think
that-
this
or
particular,
infill?
when I was doing work for another thing, I had to research the soil, and it's like this particular small neighborhood deposit of like old Iroquois sand.
Okay. Oh, from Lake Iroquois.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
For my
That's-
area, Hotel Plate, they're all clay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a couple blocks this way, and
Everyone
a lot
in Toronto was
very
clay,
Yeah.
just not
You're
here.
lucky.
Nice.
Yeah, clay is very fertile, but it's just it really limits your oxygen and it really kind of limits your root growth. You can deal with that, so that'll be we're going to chat more about that later. But you can deal with that, but it does take time. So, but it's kind of good to know the areas we've got a little extra soil, on top because that does matter a fair bit. If just briefly, if you do have kind of a heavy clay soil, you can deal with that by mounding the soil a little bit. So basically, you dig out paths and you put them onto your garden beds, and you kind of mound above. So what you're digging on is, of course, the clay that's in the soil. What you're trying to do is you're trying to create separation between where you're planting everything and the clay pan itself. Like where the clay, it's one thing if it's just kind of clay in the soil. There's a certain point where you can't even put a trowel through it. It's just so hard of a surface. You want to elevate above that and create drainage and create access to oxygen for the plant roots. So we can do that. Now, how do we use this? So this gives us a bit of an inventory in the sense of plants that like water we'll put closer to here. Plants that like sun, shade, what have you, deep root systems. We can kind of position them in the right spot. Now we need to kind of look at our plants and basically just kind of say, what do we want to grow, and what do those plants need in order to grow? Or I like it. So for that, usually what I do, in terms of the plants that you want to grow, here's where I like being able to kind of move things around. I don't like putting pen to paper quite yet. So what I usually do is I use Post-it notes. And it lets you basically try to classify the plants and then just kind of play around with different placements and go through a bit of an iterative approach. So what do we grow it? Actually, do you want to write
Sure,
it just
yeah,
for purposes
Yep.
of something that's more legible?
So I have 2 types of kale.
Kale? Okay, we can just put kale. And what we do is as we kind of list each plant, we categorize it based on the plant needs. And we talked about all those other plant needs on the other page. We don't have kind of 6 dimensions that we can put on here. We can only put 2 dimensions for this kind of simple thing. But with the 2 that we chose are, how many kind of nutrients do a plant needs? Does a plant need? Is it a light feeder, something like a lettuce or an herb, or just something a small leafy green? Is it a medium feeder, which is usually a lot of your root vegetables are medium feeders, and some of the vegetables we're harvesting the stems as well. And when I say stems, I'm not just talking celery. I'm talking onions are a stem vegetable, potatoes are a stem, asparagus is a stem vegetable. So those are usually medium feeders, and the heavy feeders are usually the ones where you're harvesting, the fruits or the flowers of the plant. Similarly, shade requirements. So where does kale fall in that? You're harvesting the leaves of it, but kale plant tends to get pretty big.
Partial shade. You could do, I would work in partial shade.
Yeah, part shade, I agree. And is it a light feeder, medium feeder, or heavy feeder?
I just like feeder.
It's one of those
It's actually
exceptions.
because
Medium.
it's sort of stocky,
Yeah,
right?
because the light feeders are anything where you harvest the leaves for the most part, which is this. But because the plant gets pretty huge, I think it goes into the medium feeder part shade category. And what else are we growing?
I've got onions.
Onions. So onions. I'm just going to mention that.
Speaking onions or green onions?
Sweet yellow onions.
So cooking,
Sweet
folding
white
onions.
cooking. I
Like
couldn't find the, I wanted Vidalia. I don't know if they
Oh, they're
grow
not
up here.
Vidalia.
They
Yeah,
don't
no,
grow
no,
up
no.
here,
Yeah.
right?
It's not that.
So what
yeah.
part of the plant are you harvesting with an onion?
Oh,
Medium.
What part of the plant?
the
It's a
bulb, the
bulb,
bulb.
which is
The
a
bulb.
stolen
But
stalk.
so basically roots, stems, leaves, fruits, flowers,
roots, I guess.
seeds.
All of them.
Is it?
Or is it all?
Stems.
It's a stem. So remember you cut the root off at when you're processing it.
Oh.
You're harvesting the stem.
Oh, the root.
So the bulb of the
It's a
onion is
stem.
considered a stem.
Yes,
Yeah.
because it's got a little root sticking
Why don't
out
they
on
call it a stem then?
Yeah.
Onion
It's a
stems.
bulb.
Yeah.
Onion stems.
Because the bulbs, you know what a bulb is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the roots, no, I see it now.
Yeah. Actually, the anything in that onion family, the allium family, you can eat anything on that plant.
Yeah.
But the part that we most try to harvest, is definitely the stem. Which, if it's a stem, then it's likely going to be a medium feeder. And then how much sun do onions like? Full shade, part sun, full sun.
You don't need sunlight.
Full sun?
For onion, do you need any sunlight?
I gave them
Yeah.
full
It will-
afternoon sun, so
Yeah.
I hope they're gonna be okay.
If you're harvesting the greens, like the sprouts of the onion, it doesn't need much light at all. But if you want the bulb to size up, then full sun. So green onions or scallions, you can part shade is fine. But if it's a bulbing onion, if you put it in part shade, it would still work, but you'd get a smaller bulb. If you want the big bulb, full sun. So what else you got?
Tomatoes.
Tomatoes. So you're harvesting the fruits.
Full.
Full sun, heavy feeder. It is pretty unanimous there. What else do we got?
Peppers, chili
Peppers.
peppers and sweet peppers.
Okay.
I'd say
Same
same
as
as tomatoes. I could be wrong though.
Yep. Same plant part. It's a fruit, and same plant family. It's a nightshade. So same.
Only from
same
experience
box.
moving them around. Okay, these ones go over better here. No, they don't.
On the type of pepper, because I've grown some peppers.
You know, lighter.
Spinach.
Spinach.
Partial shade.
Right.
Yep. You're harvesting the leaves of spinach, and it's a small leafy green. So-
I could say partial light. Light feeder.
Partial,
Okay.
partial.
Light.
What do I have? I have peas.
Peas.
Cool.
One of those exceptions.
Yeah.
So it's
Peas and regular peas.
Shelling peas.
Okay. I haven't
So-
grown those yet, so I don't know.
Size of the peas.
They do like full sun, but they much prefer morning sunlight. So it I would kind of put them in kind of the in between full sun part shade. They and we'll just kind of know. And they are, because the biggest thing, most of what they need, because most of the plant is green, that tells you it needs a lot of nitrogen. And because it's a legume, legumes attract a bacteria. There's a beneficial bacteria that takes nitrogen from the air and fixes it. So basically it takes N2 from the air and makes it NO3. Because plants, that's one of the things, plants don't actually eat nitrogen, they eat nitrates. And that's, and so something's got to turn, like, because we're, what is it, like 70% of the air is nitrogen or something like that.
Something's gotta
Plants can't use
alter
that.
it.
Something's got to alter it and make it a nitrate.
Interesting.
So legumes can actually attract bacteria that does that for us. So they don't need a whole lot of, they produce most of the bacteria does the actual work, but the legume gets the credit. They're a light feeder because they produce most of their own food.
Oh,
Light feeder and in between.
So it's pea is slow pea, snap pea, those peas.
Yeah.
all of
All of them.
those kind of peas. Okay,
And then
so
the bush can be
light feeder.
Yeah, mostly they're the trellising type, but yeah, you can get the bush peas as well.
the
I
same
could start
idea.
growing them in full
Yeah.
sun.
Eggplant.
But it's
Eggplant.
it's morning and then it leaves,
If you
right?
have to prioritize where
I think you
Right.
need a lot of sun.
Yeah.
Heavy-
Eggplant,
Have,
same family. It's another nightshade,
All eggplant.
and it's another fruit.
eggplant too. And so anything in the that's in the squash family, I presume, the eggplant?
That's in the nightshade family.
Oh,
So
nightshades. Oh,
same
okay.
thing with the same family.
Right,
You know,
those are all
tomatoes,
nightshades.
peppers, potatoes,
Right.
tobacco. They're all
Oh,
nightshades.
potatoes. I was gonna put
Well, when
potatoes.
it's tobacco, I fucked with them.
And lettuce.
Lettuce.
That's partial shade.
Parcel shade, yeah, light
Light
feeder.
to medium
Yeah.
feeder.
Exactly. Similar. It's kind of very similar to spinach. It's interesting that lettuce is actually the family that it's in. Yeah, sunflower family.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But the hard part is like lettuce. It's a tall plant. It's got beautiful flowers and whatnot, and it tastes awful. We've kind of changed it, and we
Right.
grow it the way it doesn't naturally
Harvesting
grow.
quick, so it's not bitter.
Exactly. We don't let it do what it wants
Yes.
to do, and it tastes wonderful. So, but to do so, we do kind of the opposite. We
What
basically
about the bitter one?
Well-
What about the radicchio ones that aren't bitter?
Radicchio likes a little more sunlight. Like I find radicchio is it's a perennial, so it's awesome. Or it just keeps
Oh, is
coming
it?
back.
I didn't know.
And then it usually survives Canadian winters. It's a Mediterranean perennial, but it's pretty hardy. Good idea. And yeah, so basically it will it'll grow perfectly fine in full sun, but just be aggressive at harvesting it.
So something like a Mizuna, would that have been changed to be more flavorful, or because it's any lettuce with a unique, stronger flavor? Is that been something that hasn't been tampered with to make it more flavorful?
Yeah, well, Mizuna's in a different family. So Mizuna's in the mustard family, or
Oh, right.
brassica family.
Oh, okay.
So they have that flavor naturally. It's very
What
similar
about
to arugula.
Arugula.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're the same
So-
thing. It's
Oh, yeah,
the
makes
mustard. So basically,
love
they're more
mustard.
kind of pungent to start. That's
Yeah.
that wonderful. Is it brassica rapa? You know,
Right.
a long time ago they're all the same vegetable, and they've just kind of evolved, or people have also kind of played with them and whatnot. But we get all those amazing kind of mustardy flavors out of that. So different families in lettuce. You can if you get the wilder varieties, they tend to be more spicy or peppery, however you describe it, mustardy, if you will. So it's basically the flavor will be about the same if you have it in full sun versus part shade. But there's two differences. They'll be more tender and more kind of less fibrous if you grow them in part shade, and also you can let them grow a little bit bigger. You don't have to be as aggressive at harvesting them in the summer if they're in part shade, because if they're in full sun, they're going to try to flower. So you just have to be aware.
Can we stop them flower?
Yeah, what you have to do on the really hot days, you have to cut it back to about maybe 2 inches tall again and again and again. It's going to keep trying to send up the flowers off.
Really? You
Just on the hot
cut it
days.
right back this time. So usually
Yeah.
just cut the flowers off.
Yeah, no, I cut them right to the bottom because the leaves
Because it's
start to
then
go
already
bitter.
gone bitter already if it's
Yeah.
flowered.
So
right?
get it to
Okay.
restart. But the key with those is just timing. So you try to put them in a part shade place, but also try to grow them in the spring and the fall, and you'll like the flavor much more. Don't try to grow them in the summer unless you got that perfect part shade, just a little bit of 3 hours of morning light type place for them. If you don't have that, just don't grow them in the middle of the summer.
Are you going to go over later the difference between genetically modified and hybrids in terms of tampering with a plant, and why hybrids create interesting new ones, the other one is experimental?
I can. It won't be a part of the garden planning thing, but I can
Okay.
certainly
This
talk to that. We can do a
question
Q&A at the
Sure.
end, and I do have an opinion on that for sure. But
I have one more.
sure, beets.
Beets.
Okay,
Oh, but I don't have I've got seeds.
That's
no, not
totally
yet.
fine.
Okay.
so beets. That
I
is
have-
So we're eating
It's
the
a root.
yeah,
Great.
it's a
So
root.
they need lots of sun.
Yeah, if you're harvesting the greens of the
Yeah.
beet, you put it in part shade. If you're harvesting the root, which most of us do, you put it in full sun.
Lovely.
Exactly. And it's medium to heavy. I would basically put it kind of in the medium, but on the heavy side of medium.
So if you love the beet greens and you want big beet greens, does that alter anything?
Yeah,
Put it
then you
more
basically
shade.
put it a little shadier. The
That's what I'm gonna get, I guess.
yep. Oh, okay.
So on my balcony, I
I know,
have.
they're so good.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but if you really want those big beetroots, basically, it likes full sun.
Oh, maybe I'll try those this year. Are they good?
No full sun.
The which one beats
Beet
greens?
greens.
Oh,
Oh,
I
that's
personally
very
love them.
tasty.
What do you,
yeah.
like in salads?
Saute, you
Or,
saute
or
Yeah,
them.
like,
or sauté.
like a chard or something?
Saute them with a little butter.
Yeah,
Very
like
nice.
like you would a chard or something.
Yeah. If you harvest them when they're a little bit younger, like smaller, they're perfect in salads. If you let them grow to larger size, you
Then you
saute
want to
them.
cook them. Okay,
Yeah.
very cool.
And add lemon.
Add lemon.
yeah.
Yes.
So we're at one point or what point is all this based on this garden? Like everything of mine's in a container. So does that alter some of the
It's
in terms of depth and
it limits the different factors. It simplifies things and it makes things a little more complicated because then you don't, when you're in a container, you don't have quite as broad an inventory of things that your garden provides for you. You then have to provide most of it. You can still put it in the container in a sunnier spot, or there's sometimes sunnier sides of the container. There's different depths of the container, but basically you don't have the complexity. You don't have to factor in slopes and whatnot. You might have more challenges in things like watering because you have to do most of it unless you got the reservoir. Pollinator attractors. If you're in an apartment, then it's a little harder to attract pollinators. You can still do it.
Plant pollinators all the way through it, and I sort of started that last year.
Okay. And are you on a low enough floor where you'll get discovered by the insects, the bees and whatnot?
Yes.
Oh
Definitely.
yeah. Then yeah,
Just
you're
right at
set.
the end of the driveway.
Oh
Right
yeah.
there.
No problem at all then.
Full
Yeah.
sun.
Yeah, that'll be good. So watering will be your own challenge on that, but a lot of the
keep
other.
working on getting, like I get maybe 4 eggplants out of a small container. I won't get huge, but I got a lot of variety. So
Yeah, one of the challenges with containers, getting into a little complexity, but this is worth chatting about, is that we mentioned before, different nutrients do different things for the plants. And one of the ones that's relevant, if you're harvesting the root or the fruit, is you need lots of phosphorus. Because what the phosphorus does is it basically, when you give a plant more phosphorus, it stimulates it to basically widen its xylem and phloem, specifically the phloem, which is where that's the carbohydrate highway in the plant. So basically the carbohydrates that are produced generally from photosynthesis, they travel through the phloem, and a lot of them, they'll go to the plant's carbohydrate storage, which is the root and the fruit. So if you want to get more, kind of fruits or bigger roots in a plant, you want more phosphorus.
and what is a natural source of more phosphorus?
The most commonly used one is bone meal.
Okay, got it.
There's a whole lot of, like bat guano has a lot of phosphorus, and
Thinking bird poop, yes.
Yeah.
Bone meal
Yeah.
source.
but bone meal is the most common one. But the hard part about phosphorus, it is the most, what's called the mobile nutrient.
Right.
So basically as soon as you get a hard rain, basically assume that a lot of your phosphorus is now in the storm drain. And then, so you got to replace phosphorus regularly. And then you'll get, that's one of the things, like, it could be a broad nutrient type thing, could be a sunlight thing, but it sounds like, if you've got basically a container, garden at the end of your driveway, it's got full sun, it's going to be fully exposed to the elements. And because you've probably got everything planted in potting soil isn't as good at hanging on to nutrients as clay soil is, for example. And because phosphorus is the most mobile nutrient, and eggplants love phosphorus, you just get into a regimen where just give it a top up in phosphorus a few times
Does
in the
that
year.
include eggshells?
No, that's going to be eggshells are mostly
That's calcium.
calcium. Yeah.
But do eggshells really work? Somebody told me that once, and then somebody told me that was just a myth.
No,
That
they
when you
work.
had to
They do
do
work.
something else
You have to
different
grind
to
them.
them to get them
Powder.
You
in.
grind them.
Grind
Is
them
it-
like a powder. I kept all my eggshells. I keep every eggshell. I've got mountains of them.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
great.
Yes,
I'll start
one
doing
question.
that.
Radishes, would they fall in the sort of potgy?
Radishes,
I love
the
radishes.
hardest thing about radishes, they like, here's the hard part, and this is going to sound contradictory. They're a full sun, cool sun plant,
Right.
which contradictory, right?
Right.
But what that means, the easiest way to plant them is put them in a full sun place in the spring or in the fall.
Right.
Right.
If you're planting them in the summer, then eastern light only.
There's a few
Okay,
plants that
that's
are
good.
just
Then I just need to
spring and
probably
fall.
throw some phosphorus on the radishes.
Yeah, and that'll kind of size them up. So
Can we add a few more plants?
we could. How much room do you have in your garden?
I have some herbs as well. Do they fall under the bracket of, like, can we just lump them all together as herbs?
Most of them. There's herbs because they're usually kind of the smaller leafy greens. Most of them kind of belong up here.
Okay.
There's a few. The basils tend to like more full sun because they get a little bit bigger. Thyme will grow in part shade, but it prefers full sun. Like they're
It
so
also
it's
likes gritty soil, right? Like
yeah,
the-
it likes the well draining
And
because
so
it's
does rosemary, which
Yeah.
is a tough one.
these are the perennial mints. So basically, they're like oregano, rosemary, thyme. They're all in the mint family, and they're all perennials. And they like they get woody, both the roots and the stems. And they do like well draining soil. They do rot a little bit in non well draining soil. A lot of the other herbs like kind of parsley, cilantro, and whatnot. They sage and marjoram are mint.
Is it in the oregano family? It is in the
It's in the
oregano.
mint. Yeah,
Yeah.
same family as oregano. When I say mint, I don't mean peppermint. I mean Lamiaceae. It's the family name, and so they're all in that family.
If then, so we actually used one of the containers last year to put herbs into, but now that I know that there's the woody perennials, does it?
They do better in there. If you're growing a perennial herb in a container, try to put it in a shadier spot in the winter. Like especially if it's hypothetically in this container, if you can move that to a shadier spot in the winter. What hurts them? They're okay with the cold, and as long as it's not really really cold, they'll be just fine. Some of them are a little more tender than others. Like rosemary it will get beaten up a little bit by the extreme cold. But your biggest risk in a perennial in a container, any perennial, but herbs especially, is that if you leave them out and then basically you get those kind of sunny days in December and January, and so the plant freezes, then the roots thaw, and then it freezes again, and then it thaws. That's what beats up the plant. It's not the cold weather. It wants to go largely dormant and stay dormant, where the roots, so there'll be a little activity at the root level and nothing above. So plant it in a lighter colored container to deflect some of the heat from the sun. Move the container into a shadier spot. Cover it with straw or something again that'll kind of insulate it and keep the cold inside.
That kind of black drop cloth is a white one.
Yeah, white facing outward.
So what
Yeah.
I've done, and I've had tarragon growing for years, is I had a square pot, I put styrofoam
Oh yeah.
sheeting
Yeah.
around it, so I
Insulate it.
insulated around it, and it's been going. After a few years, the plant, you have to replant it, but
Yeah.
it's been going well for years.
It works. Yeah. Because that's the key is you're not trying to insulate it from the cold. You're trying to insulate it from the warmth. Because you just don't want that thing freezing, thawing. So basically, in a container, you get the benefit. You can just hide it into the shady spot in your yard, as long as the container's not too heavy, and then just make sure it gets access to just a little bit of water, not much, like just a tiny bit, and it should survive unless you get a really cold winter.
Can I ask, like, if I have this year I want to grow cucumber, squash,
Yep.
and then
Oh, you want to add it?
cucumber, squash, and this year I want to try watermelon.
Yeah.
So what do? Because they are very long. So how do you decide?
Yeah.
which one?
Those are all, so they're all cucurbits. Cucurbitaceae is the family name. They're all in the same family. Full sun, heavy feeder, and
It's
they-
happy feeder at the wood or at where they plant.
at the root. It will re-root in a few spots. Like if you let it vine, if you don't trellis it, you let it vine in the ground, it will re-root in multiple spots as well.
So
Same
we
as squash?
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we put
That's
nutrient
also
on
cucurbits.
different areas.
Yeah. So what I usually do is if you want it to root a little bit more, I will basically I'll let it vine out, and then I'll cover the vine in a few spots with soil. Just mound a little bit of soil up around the vine and try to stimulate it to send out new roots. You don't want it to be like mounded on the vine because you don't want that vine to rot. You just want it to just kind of mound a little bit of soil against it, but not a big amount of soil
So
on top of
full
it.
sun and
Because
full
it's not
heavy feeder.
helpful also with the mildew and stuff, it's just too close.
Yeah. If you can trellis it, it's good. Watermelon's tough to trellis, and things like
Watermelon trellis?
yeah, you can run them up a trellis, but then you have to get the really like a strong trellis, and then you have to build hammocks for the watermelons themselves. So a little netting, and then tie the actual fruits to the yeah.
So it doesn't rip the plant down.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, what I recommend is there's going to be a lot of rodents right when that the watermelons or the cantaloupe or whatever becomes perfectly ripe. They're waiting same as you are, and then as soon as it's ripe, they might get to it first.
Smell it.
That happens.
Yep.
I put my aunt's garden.
It's so little watermelon.
Yeah. Yeah.
So don't
When
leave
it's
it,
when it's
just pick
small.
it that day, don't say, oh, I'll pick it
Yeah, some of them you can let counter ripen, but also, but the best bet is when the melon itself, or the is still small. It only works with sugar. What are they called? Sugar baby or whatever, like the small watermelons. Wrap it in nylons. Like you go to Dollarama, get those little nylon anklets. And this works for all squash as well, all small melons. When the fruits just come out, just put a little anklet nylon on it, and as the fruit expands, the nylon will as well. And it just kind of covers things up, and that tiny little layer of nylon actually it does a pretty good job at preventing rodents from biting it. So yeah, it's a neat little thing. So let's turn this, just in the interest of time, let's turn this into your garden plan.
Yes.
So here's what we've got.
If you don't mind, can I take a photo of this?
Yeah, I need one later.
What's that?
We'll take photo later.
Oh sure, yeah, we can hold it up. So now it's a match the feature type thing. So let's your two most kind of populous areas are the kind of part shade light feeder and your full sun heavy feeders. So let's start where you've got kind of the most density. Full sun heavy feeder. I always kind of start where I expect to have the greatest premium. The lamb's quarters, they're native to Ontario.
Yeah.
Which of these plants are native to anywhere in the eastern side of North America?
Onions, hill.
All of them?
None of them.
None of them.
Not a one. Basically, Middle East. These are from various places. Eurasia, Middle East. You have a bias.
Wow, I sure do.
Indian subcontinent, Northern South America.
Yeah.
None of them are from here. Lamb's
does
quarters
make
are from
sense.
here. And so basically, lamb's quarters are what we should be eating. This is just what we choose to eat.
Right.
And it's
All the stuff that people brought over here.
Nobody grows lamb's quarter.
But what is an
no,
indigenous
well they
people
accidentally
eat?
grow.
What do the indigenous people eat?
Things like
Squash
lamb's
beans.
quarters and whatnot. Like
There's
there's
berries.
yeah, like the most commonly grown kind of native plants. Some types of chives are native to here. Sunchokes are native to here. Some types of sorrel are native to here. But then a whole lot of think of all the weeds, the things that we call weeds.
The garlic
Most of
mushroom
them are
probably could eat
Dandelions.
anyway.
Dandelions are not native.
They're not?
No,
How did they get here?
there is the Europeans brought them over.
They're not
But
right.
as a food source
Ah.
because they are a food source.
But I did actually learn that the whole part, well, that's not true. The stem is not edible, but
But the rest of it
the
is.
rest of the dandelion
and the
Yeah, the
leaves
roots
is
and the
edible.
leaves.
The stem?
Not the stem.
Oh,
Yep.
the Vietnamese. I saw people we eat the stem.
Yeah,
It's
hollow
so
part,
bitter.
Yeah, that's good. It's tasty.
Right?
Okay.
The
Do you
flour?
cook it?
I eat it as salad, put into the hot soup.
Oh.
It's good.
This the middle of this
You can stir fry
thing. I
too.
just learned this last week. This isn't a sprayed lawn, is it?
No.
Is that these are sweet?
Yes.
These are fabulous.
Yes.
The flower. I love eating all flowers. I
Maybe that's why the dog likes
I try the stuff that's in my garden and see.
Oh, okay. So
No,
we're
they're
putting
a bit too
these.
bitter for me.
Yeah. So now
I
it's
love
a placement process.
No, I
So
don't
let's
like
start
it
with the
at
most
all.
crowded area. Full sun heavy feeder. Where's the full sun heavy feeder spot in your garden?
Didn't pick it well.
Well, I would say that like these areas have the best soil stuff that's going on and are in the full sun area.
Yeah. This is the best soil, but is this, have you got enough compost? This is going to be kind of clay heavy soil, and this is the bottom of the slope.
Yes.
So this
right.
will be, it's going to take some work because you got to basically work with the soil a little bit. But this will have kind of pre-made natural nutrients in it. This might have a lot of nutrients in it if you added a lot of compost to it.
Right.
So it's so either one of those is appropriate if you know this is fertile. If you've grown in it in the last year and then not replenished the compost, then maybe this is less fertile than that.
We
But that
did
depends.
top up.
Oh, perfect.
We did top up.
Then,
at the-
then
yeah,
either
in
one
the
of
spring.
these.
Okay.
So then another factor is which one is most susceptible to pests.
You said that raccoons like peppers. I remember that.
Raccoons like peppers, and so basically, yeah. The,
Squirrels.
Raccoons
Rats.
like everything.
so if you got raccoons,
I
so maybe
would-
those go in the
yeah, I
protected
would-
zone.
Put the peppers there for sure.
Yeah.
They didn't plant. Why do I feel like that would be popular?
I've at Allen Gardens, the squirrels eat our, we don't grow them anymore. The squirrels eat our eggplants. our eggplants and our brassicas. They've started to eat our tomatoes now. Like normally they drink your tomatoes. You know how they take a bite and they throw it aside?
Oh,
They're not eating it, they're drinking it. They're kind of
sucking the
smart.
juice out.
So if you have a water bowl, which is good for pollinators, pollinating insects as well,
They'll drink the water.
they usually won't go after your tomatoes. But we trained our squirrels. They would run down, grab a fruit, like just a small cherry tomato, run up the tree, eat it.
Because they're nice and safe up the
Yeah,
tree.
which when you factor in they can do that
Yeah.
10 times an hour, and there's about 1,000 squirrels living in Allen Gardens. We didn't really harvest a whole lot of tomatoes last year. The one complexity of cucumbers,
They need a trellis.
you got to trellis them.
Yeah, I have
So
a
here
shrine
would
to
be
my
difficult
trellis.
for the cucumbers. It might be difficult to trellis them as well, because then you'd lose your protection there. The cucumbers might need to go somewhere different, like hypothetically around there, just somewhere where it's easy to trellis.
Yeah, like right on that gate
In
fence you can throw.
in here.
Yeah, is
Yeah.
that spot available?
Ah, sure it is.
And then
Okay,
use
yeah.
that chicken wire for
Yeah.
trellising, right?
Yeah,
Or the
easy
fence.
trellis.
Well, it could grow up the
It
fence.
can, support
Behind,
itself on
yeah.
the fence. Yeah.
And then that wooden thing, sort of, even
So-
though it's on the other side.
Yeah.
You can train them with this tree.
That one, right beside the tree is going to be hard, because it's not going to be as fertile, because the tree will pull in a lot of
Yeah.
nutrients.
Suck the water away and lots of stuff.
So
Cucumbers there.
Right, so, okay, you gotta
So-
think about what's around
Yep.
as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
yeah.
you're forsaking some sunlight for the, gotta pretend it's the word, the trellisability of the cucumber, but it's worth it. You need to trellis it, and you can't trellis it in there. You could build a trellis here, but that would be a bit of an ordeal. I think
In
the
the
right
way.
spot is right there.
So then, this is only because Facebook has been marketing this like thing to me. And I don't know if I would try it this year.
Okay.
But if I had a trellis this way,
Yep. And just grow them up.
and people have been growing lettuce behind,
Well, that's interesting,
because then it's,
you're getting the shade.
yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah. You'd have to crawl in
Yeah,
based
it's
on that.
always best there.
But yeah,
that is possible.
it is totally possible, and then a lot
So
of
like
the
a
fruits.
trellisy, with arms sort of thing on it, but on an angle, instead of going up.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah. The ultimate would be, you know what a cattle kennel is?
Yeah.
That would be the best, where you could just it's used for cattle fencing, but what it is, it's very rigid. It's like 10 gauge wire mesh, and you could just kind of lay it at an angle.
Okay, so it's
And
sort of
then-
like chicken wire, but a different,
But much more rigid.
consistently
Yeah.
rigid,
And
okay.
it's normally kind of either 4-inch by 4-inch gaps or 6-inch by 6-inch, and you just kind of and it's because it's rigid, you could just kind of run that up. That would be amazing. The hard part, cattle panels are amazing for vegetable gardening. The hard part is getting it here, because it's not something you can just fit in the back of your car. It's used for fencing, and it's normally 4 feet tall by typically about 12 feet wide, and it's a heavy gauge
Are you good with it?
wire mesh, and so you can just lean it against something, or you can bend it and just arch it.
Anyways, that's an extravagant thing
Yeah.
for a little yard. But-
Next, we'll just kind of keep working our way up. Beets and onions. Those are, both kind of, medium feeders. Onions in particular need probably a little bit more sun. They don't have to have more sun, but you get bigger bulbs if they're in full sun. Both of them are going to like a little bit of drainage if possible. Is there a good spot for
There,
those?
I'm saying here, above the pepper, or with the other ones
Yep.
on the side.
Well,
here.
if there's 2 sections here too,
Mhm.
so one would be for cucumber. So we still have one more section here.
Do you have
But
room
that's
up
good.
here? Is there
You
is
want
this all
more
garlic,
sun.
or-
That's the
Yeah.
garlic.
Okay, so then so I think you're down here then.
So the beets and onions could go here.
Yeah, onions to
How
the
much-
the slightly sunnier side.
That probably gets quite shady, that tree, right?
On the other,
Filled
yeah.
out, filled out.
From about here down, it's most shade.
Okay, so try to squeeze them in there as much as
Use
possible.
the same for garlic and onion.
Basically they like, it's the same plant family, so they like, the more sun it gets, the bigger the bulbs, for sure. So, and they both like well draining soil. And we'll work our way up. Kale, medium feeder, but kind of part shade, a little more sun is good, but if it, morning sun is awesome. and they will get pretty tall.
So, but the only problem is I have to put them in the ground.
Yeah. You could put them in containers. They get taller or growing
What are
on
you
the ground.
talking, what plant are we talking about now?
Kale.
So we need something that's partial shade. The morning light, which is over here.
Yep. So what do you think? You got that?
I'll
You going
figure
here?
something out.
Okay. If you could just find a way to screen the,
Oh, yeah.
like just
Yeah.
get a mesh and just screen the stones out, then that could be good. All right.
So for more drainage in soil, like what I added to my pots is vermiculite into
Yeah.
the soil, which is a
Very
natural
good.
thing, lava from volcanoes. That helps.
Yeah, perlite or vermiculite, same thing.
Yeah.
Those, you know, when you get potting mix, those little either
White.
vermiculite is gray and perlite is white. The
Oh, I
little-
always wondered what those were.
super-
So it
yeah.
just adds space in the soil.
It's
So
if
you
you
can-
if you look at vermiculite, like if you look at perlite really closely, it looks like a lava rock where there's all these little gaps in it. If you look at vermiculite really closely, like under a microscope, you're going to see all these jagged layers.
Cool.
And what it is, it's a stone that they heat up, and it basically just kind of expands when they heat it. Then they smash it to break it up into pieces, and it's used as just kind of lighten this potting mix. But
Huh,
all those
okay.
layers or the holes, what
Cool.
they do is they create pockets that nutrient ions can sit in, or that air pockets can sit in. So basically, it lightens the soil and it gives the plants access to more oxygen, and it hangs on to nutrients, even phosphorus to a degree. So it's it's pretty good, but it doesn't hold on to that much phosphorus. It depends on how much rain it gets. But they're really good additions. It can be a little expensive if you do it on a large scale,
Yeah.
like for an in-ground garden, but for a container, perfect. So, and then we'll just do our we'll start with the peas because they're the most unique.
Well, and I
They
had
need-
them over there. Like,
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you're gonna get
Morning.
the late day.
is that enough?
Mornings. Or sorry, morning.
Morning.
Oh, that's
Morning,
perfect.
that's
yeah.
morning,
That's
yeah.
what you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But like, yeah, after after
Yeah.
12, it doesn't
It's
get
nothing,
And you're
yeah.
gonna
Totally
trellis
fine.
this.
And I'll create some sort. Yeah, don't worry.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
And you're gonna trellis something here. Yeah, that's cool. So that's
Here.
everything going.
Okay. And then
So much
these,
lettuce and
just in your
turnips.
part shade area, they don't need a whole lot of sunlight or nutrients. So
What about that big pot right there?
Yeah, maybe. What about the container there?
oh yeah, that would be great.
I put all the herbs in there.
Yep. The other good thing to know about these, and this is just a convenience thing, but it matters as the season goes on. Your herbs, your lettuce and spinach, those are your cut and come again type crops. So basically, the crops where it's kind of you harvest once and then it's done. Things like beetroots and things like potatoes and whatnot. Those could be in some far off corner of the garden. It doesn't matter. But the ones where you're going to be kind of checking on them and harvesting them every
Getting
few
every
days.
day. Zone 1.
Yes, permaculture zones.
Whoa.
Nicely done.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Somebody's been doing the research.
Yes.
I'm studying it now.
Oh, okay.
Online, the
Yeah.
Star Home.
Usually zone 1 is the first, immediately around your house.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that you know permaculture. Well done. But yes, basically, the cut and come again type things are, you want them in a really accessible spot. So right here where, you can just kind of come out of your house and, just kind of with scissors grab them real quick.
Yeah.
That's great. You just don't want to hide them because at a certain point you never want harvesting to become a chore. And believe it or not,
Yeah, it does.
by
At the end
kind
of
of
the
August,
summer.
September, it really does. So
Yeah, when
keep
you
it
want
simple.
chives.
Like, I don't want to do it
Yes.
now.
So
Cool.
what you've got now is a garden plan, but this is just kind of notional. Now you just kind of start to look at other factors. So for example, which plants, companion planting and whatnot, which plants don't like each other? Which plants are going to compete for nutrients? Which plants are going to, basically which plants do work well together where they go for different nutrients from the soil so they're not competing. Where in some cases, the plants that are most susceptible to different pests, usually you want to put aromatics beside them just to make them a little harder to smell. And these are some of the companion planting principles. So basically, what you want to do is plants from the same family to start with usually take the same nutrients out of the soil. So they end up competing with each other. Plants from different families take different nutrients out. Have you got any kind of same plant families side by side here?
Yes, and I know another problem.
Okay.
So these two shouldn't be side by side. But right. and they were going in these 2 spots there.
Eggplants
But in
and
bed number
peppers.
2 is also where we had our peppers last year.
Okay, yeah, we're, crop rotation as well. So basically, is there a way to split these somehow?
So, you said that they can't share soil space. So
Yeah.
I could put something in between them.
Yeah.
Is there enough space to fit a third thing?
You could, if you could put flowers, or if you put something in between
Okay.
where the roots aren't pulling the same, they're not competing for the same nutrients. Because as soon as you see, nightshade, they're gonna, all plants go for all 17 of the most commonly known nutrients, but nightshades are gonna want a little more phosphorus, a little more calcium, a little more magnesium than a lot of the other plants. And so when you get 2 that are going for those, that have the same biases, you end up with 2 things. Number one is they compete with each other, so they net they each get a little less of those nutrients they need more of. And number 2 is your soil becomes skewed over time.
Depleted.
Yeah, it'll become depleted in certain types because you'll probably replenish it with an all-purpose fertilizer like compost. So you build skews in your nutrient mix. So it is good to kind of either separate them or put something in between, and it makes your life easier. And it also makes their lives easier as well.
Okay. So yeah, I have marigold, but there's the basil too,
Yep,
which would be nice and sunny there.
Somebody from Allen Gardens yesterday told me to plant, basil with my tomatoes.
Yep.
And that even the flavor might go into the tomato.
Yeah, there's a rule, an unscientific rule, but it seems to be true. If they work on a plate together, they work in the garden together.
Huh.
So there's that. But more specifically, anything in the mint family, Lamiaceae, which includes basil.
But not spearmint or mint.
It doesn't do that too, but just be wary before you put those in your garden.
It's too late.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Everywhere.
Yeah, they become a weed quick. Or anything in the carrot family. So that includes fennel, it includes cilantro, it includes parsley, celery, anything in that family. They're both very aromatic. Onions are as well. They're aromatic, and what they do is they confuse a lot of the flying pests that are trying to smell out your, their victims, which in many cases can be, for peppers, you're worried about what's called the pepper fly. It's basically they lay eggs just in the, just inside the epidermis of the pepper. The eggs hatch and the larvae crawl inside. You don't even know they're there. And then all of a sudden the bottom of your pepper's rotting and you don't know why. For tomatoes, you're worried to a degree about aphids. Aphids are usually pretty controllable, but they're slightly annoying. The ones that go after tomatoes are more controllable than the ones that go after cabbages, different type. But tomatoes, you're worried tremendously about the Colorado potato beetle is a really bad one for that. And then tomato hornworms, the hawk moth. So if you can put an aromatic right beside those, like basil, it just slightly reduces the odds that your tomatoes will get discovered.
What is it on tomato plants towards the end of the season that makes the leaves all
White
Yellowy and brownish
Yeah.
or white.
is that that?
That's mostly, hopefully it's early blight. So the white itself, if it's just white and nothing else, that's powdery mildew. If you start to get some yellowing on that, you'll see kind of, usually it's a kind of a brown splotch. And if you look closely at the brown splotch, you'll see these contoured lines like light brown, dark brown, light brown, dark brown. And then yellow around that, that's early blight. And if it's there's so many things. If there's if it's you don't get the contoured lines and it's mid-September onwards, it's probably late blight, which is horrible. Early blight's normal and preventable or controllable. Late blight's awful. If you start to get little lesions or growths on the fruits themselves, that could be late blight, but it could be bacterial speck. It could be, there's so many different
So many
things.
things. Google is your friend.
Yeah, tomatoes are one of the most, like, the different fungal diseases love tomato plants. So you just have to know that.
And the
Pretty
critters.
lucky.
I've had
Yeah.
white fly, well, one about because
Oh,
I'm
white
the
fly.
mama's son, so that by the time the fruits are ready and the
Yeah.
plant is getting weaker because of the sunlight, it just gets
Neem oil is your friend for whiteflies, and nematodes. But nematodes for whiteflies, you got to put it in April or September. So if it's mid-July, it's too late. So then you just go right to the neem oil for that. So yeah, so we we'll put something
Flowers
in
of some
between.
sort in between.
Flowers or herbs, like an aromatic
Marigolds
would be
are
great.
Very good with tomatoes.
They are.
They're also good at getting rid of bugs that are gonna eat
Yeah.
you.
And there's I know people who
Look
specialize in growing tomatoes that swear marigolds change the flavor. It enhances the flavor of tomatoes.
Enhance.
Yeah, non-scientific, just what I'm told by people who know more than I do about tomatoes. So basically, marigolds are a great choice.
Folklore, not that boring science that you have to mention.
Exactly. Just know that some types, try to get the smaller marigolds. Some types of marigolds can get pretty large, and they will start to compete with the the tomatoes for nutrients. But you can get smaller types. So you've got that. Is there anything else? There's some common rules, like when you get legumes and onions, keep them separated, which we did, which is great. Plants in the same family, especially large ones, keep them separated. So we've just got the one there, but we're good beyond that. And I think from a companion planting perspective, I think you're good here. Last perspective then, assuming again we put something in between. Last perspective is a crop rotation perspective. Another thing you want to do is you never want to put a plant from the same family in the same spot in your garden as existed last year. And the reason being is twofold. We've kind of touched on both of them already. Number one is nutrients. They're, essentially you're getting the same biases of nutrients getting pulled out of the soil. There will be less of it available, and your soil will get more and more skewed over the years. And number two is pests, because the pests that love nightshades, for example, they're going to feast on your nightshades once they discover them, if they discover them. And then in a lot of cases, what they're going to do is they're going to overwinter into the soil right below that nightshade. And by nightshades, I'm talking peppers, eggplants, and tomatoes. Potatoes as well. Anything in that family, if they'll overwinter beneath it, and then when they wake up in the spring, they expect another nightshade to be there. And if there is, score. They're gonna have a good time feasting on your plants.
And
So
a container
rotate.
garden, that's hard to do because I only have so many containers that are good enough for tomatoes. So
I
Yeah.
don't know if you're able to do it. I have millions of containers because I have a concrete backyard. So I just let the roots and everything die over the years, let them winter, and then I put all the soil in one thing and I mix it up and
That's exactly the answer.
I put
Rotate.
new stuff in every
Yeah.
pot.
You
every
can't
year.
rotate the plants, so you can rotate the soil.
I'm so glad.
Yeah.
Even though it's
Yeah.
a lot of work, because I wasn't sure if I needed to. Especially another thing is SIP containers, right? Sub-irrigation draining.
Yeah.
Some of mine are that, and
Yeah.
I need to clean them out before I use them in the spring because there's all that water or whatever sitting in the bottom from the winter.
So just empty the soil onto a tarp,
I
mix
do.
it up,
Okay, I'll do
redistribute it, and then problem solved.
So next year,
Yep.
if you still want to plant the same plant, so what would you suggest? Or should
Move 'em
we
around.
not?
Yeah. You would basically you try to find something else and move it in there. If you get really good at it, you can identify, were there any pests last year? No. What were the nutrient biases, and you can try to replace those biases. So you'll fix the soil partly by putting an all-purpose fertilizer in, like compost, but you'll supplement it with that
The phosphorus or the nitrogen.
yeah,
or
whatever
whatever's
that
missing.
plant's biases were. But when you're just kind of starting out, your best bet is just move it, even if it's a slightly less optimal place. The garden is more important than that year's peppers, for example. The garden as a whole, and it's just an investment. When you rotate things around, your soil becomes healthier. You don't get the biases in nutrients, you don't get a lot of the pest infestations as well. But also, if you rotate it by, especially in Toronto gardens, where you get the clay-heavy gardens, if you rotate it by a root type, you go deep root to shallow root to tap root,
together, okay.
then basically over time, and then when you take the plants out at the end of the year, you leave the roots in. So you just cut the stems, leave the roots in to rot. You'll improve your soil texture as well over the
Of
years.
course. No-till gardening.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I just learned that last year and
Mulch.
let all the roots do
Right
it,
in.
and my soil is just
Chop
gorgeous
and
this
drop
year.
too. When
Yeah.
you're
if you don't have any pest infestations, then
Yeah.
chop and drop. If you have the pests, you want to do two things: remove the infested areas, but the parts of the soil that had the infestation above them, don't mulch that. Leave them covered. Leave them exposed to all the wonders of Canadian winters,
Right.
and then there'll be fewer pests in the
you
spring.
put cardboard on top, wouldn't that help?
Not if you think the pests are in the soil or the
yeah.
larvae or the eggs are in the soil
Yeah.
after. You want to expose that, and you might even want to go out, like after the first frost, go out with a hard rake and just scrape the soil a little bit
Just
and
let
just
them.
expose them
Right.
to the Canadian winter. You know, sounds harsh, but you know,
Exposed them
They're
to
microbes.
Canadian
We don't care.
yeah,
winter.
exactly. So we now have our you know, our plan pending you know, putting something in between that, and you might maybe flip the peppers and eggplants to be safe. Is that all right?
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't mind at all.
Now you still got, you know, I might add, the way it is, you're still, now instead of replacing peppers from last year with peppers from this year, you're replacing a nightshade from last year, so you're still not adhering completely to the crop rotation purposes. But I recognize this is unique because it's a covered, like, protected area. So I would say definitely supplement with extra phosphorus, calcium, and magnesium in particular. And then that's the main thing. Potatoes, you also have to do potassium, yeah, phosphorus, magnesium, and calcium for the peppers or the biggies. Actually, one other thing, for peppers specifically, you know that unique peppery flavor? You'll get it in peppers, you'll get it in celery, you'll get it in onions, in mustards. What you're tasting is sulfur.
Really?
Yeah. The main flavor drivers of plants, sulfur is in a whole lot of them. When it's that kind of sharp taste, that you know, celery is sulfur as well. When it's that you know, that sharp taste is usually sulfur.
Fennel?
When it's maybe you probably know this. I haven't heard fennel associated with, but
No,
I
but I
wouldn't
mean,
be
I'm
surprised.
just thinking of that flavor. It's got something quite.
It is unique, the licoricey flavor.
And
When you get the
beets,
earthy
yeah.
flavor, like beets, it's boron. Boron is a magic ingredient for beets. And then the tomatoes, they like sulfur and boron, but the magic ingredient for them is copper. So, and then, if you can add a little bit of copper, it just enhances the flavor.
To which one?
Tomatoes.
Really?
Yeah. And, you know, the tomato farmers all have kind of recipes with these things, and they put them in at the time of planting. One thing though, so you're not putting straight, copper gets measured in parts per million. So basically, you know, the copper-based fertilizers you're putting in are maybe, you know, 1% copper. It's not 100% copper.
But you have to use
So it makes a big
organic
difference.
fertilizers. You can't use any other fertilizer.
Yeah, I only grow organically, and there
It's
do
important to
exist
mention
copper
for
ones.
people that haven't transitioned.
Yeah, I have this copper to prevent slugs.
Slugs, yeah.
Can I put around?
Yep, it will slowly leach into the soil. It takes time, of course, but that does work. You know, so do it way in advance of when you plant the tomatoes.
Can you just repeat again? Copper, tomato,
Yeah,
and
tomatoes.
then eggplant is.
I don't know eggplant in particular. I'm guessing eggplant probably likes boron because it does have kind of a slightly earthy flavor. Peppers, mustards, celery, onions, it's sulfur,
Sulfur.
and then beets is boron. And then cucumbers, there's I don't think there's anything particular that drives the flavor of those, and most of the others don't have too much flavor.
They
Do
do.
now have a
Things to
gardening plan, and then what we were going to do at the end was just basically you know, quickly you know, do a little bit of planting into the soil and just kind of demonstrate that, as well as the concept of succession planting. And I'll just finish this succession planting first.
Oh, great.
Succession planting is interesting because everything we talked about, this assumes everything's going in all at the same time. But you know, some of these have different life cycles. So basically, you know, tomatoes are a hot crop, hot crop,
Right.
hot crop, and then you know, basically those they cannot go in until you know, usually your overnight lows are in the double digits. So
Last
basically,
fall, after the last fall.
yeah. So these are usually consistently the 3rd or 4th week of May is when
Except
these
it's
go in.
getting earlier every year.
Actually, well, this year we
This
can't
year
get them in
it's
until, but yeah.
Amazing.
So basically, these are hot crops. There's a whole lot of other ones.
So
like
your greens can go in early.
Yep.
Yeah.
Most herbs, peas. Basically, these ones are cool crops: lettuce, peas, spinach, herbs. But they're, you know, the others are cool crops as well. But those ones, you actually don't want them in the middle of summer. So these are spring and fall crops. If you put them in summer, then you really need to disguise them from the heat. There is a huge risk of them bolting. Things, you know, you can take measures like certain types of lettuce, your romaine type lettuce and whatnot is less susceptible to bolting, and you can find types that are less susceptible. But your best bet is planting these early, and then you know, herbs, you've got some flexibility. Basil's you know, basil, thyme and whatnot, you can go a little bit later, that sort of thing. But beets, onions, kale, you know, I'll just go an equal sign for now. Those are fine either way. They can withstand the cold and they can withstand the heat. So you've got flexibility. So what I'd say is, you know, once you've got your plan, this is kind of, you know, a space type plan, but it's not a time type plan. Now you want to make it a little bit, you know, temporal as well, in the sense of, do you have the opportunity to succession plant some of these? Because they don't all need to go in. Could you put the, you know, hypothetically, could you put the beets and onions in the same space as something else? Grow those first, harvest them, and then, you know, so cucumber is a great example.
Like you do with garlic.
Yeah, because garlic you have out by, you know, hopefully late July or so, and then you plant a full crop.
How long do the onions take? It's my first year growing them.
Onions, if you're starting them indoors, usually I always start onions from a seed indoors and I transplant them. You're usually counting on about 60 days. If you direct seeded them in your garden.
Well, I put the bulbs right in.
Oh, you did sets or whatever?
Bulbs, they're bulbs.
Yep. Okay.
White onions, cooking
Yeah.
onions.
All right,
So I just did them.
Yeah, if you start from
couple of
those, it's
days
going to be
ago.
basically 60, 70 days.
Okay.
So not too bad. If you start from seed, it's going to be 90 or
Yeah,
100 days.
I don't do a heck of a
And,
lot from seed anymore,
yeah.
just from
So I start as many things indoors as possible, because then what I can do is like, you know, basically, you know, onions, if I start them indoors, I can put mature seedlings outside, and then I dramatically reduce the amount of time that they're in the garden, and that lets me get more waves of vegetables in.
Right.
And in an ideal
are
world,
green beans the same thing as peas?
yeah,
Is it the
legumes.
same?
Yeah, yeah, they're totally legumes. If you get pole beans, they tend to take a little longer.
And they don't
you know,
taste
but
very good.
yeah, I actually prefer
Sorry.
the bush beans as well. I'm with you on that.
I got them from Food Up Toronto, and I went, I'm great.
Well, what about haricot vert French beans? They're great.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
trying this
Oh,
year
yeah.
for the first time.
Those are my
from
favorites.
seed.
So.
Yeah, me
Yeah.
too.
I just get their organic green jade, which is that
Yeah,
that
mine
variety.
are
And
organic
they taste
somewhere. I don't
wonderful.
remember.
One thing worth mentioning, you might be mentioning, is this thing that people do where they take their seedlings and they start putting them out during the day and taking them in at night, and then they go. Well, if you have a million of them, I don't know how you do that.
Well,
But
that's the whole
What kind of my life these days? Yep.
Yeah.
stratifying
Yeah.
sort
They
of,
get used to
right?
the
Getting used to the
climate.
cold.
Yeah, hardening off.
That's what,
Hard-
so
Hardening
those
up.
ones sitting there are
Yeah.
all of well, everything.
so you put them in the garage at night?
No, I bring them back inside.
Okay.
And you just the key to hardening off is so it's basically your seedlings are growing indoors in your house, so they've got you know, very little access to direct sunlight. The temperature is pretty much a rock solid, whatever it is, call it 21 degrees. There's no wind, there's no pests. There's you know, like basically they've got a very cushy life inside your house.
And then they
They
go
might be a little light starved, but then you put them outside, and the first thing that gets them is the sun.
So they get
And then-
sunburns.
Yeah.
I have sunburned plants.
I have
before.
sunburned plants.
Yeah.
I
And
can
then
feel
when you get
this,
those,
yeah, already.
yeah, those irregular white splotches on your plant when they first go outside, that's sun scald.
Huh.
And what you do is so they're susceptible because indoors the intensity of the light is nothing compared to outside. So what you
Especially
do
if
is
you
you
have
just
newer windows.
introduce, and you just introduce them to the light. Usually, you know, you put them out for a couple hours in a morning, maybe about a week before you intend to transplant them outside, you know,
not
permanently.
bad.
Then bring them back in after a couple hours, and just that morning sunlight's a little cooler. Next day, you maybe go 4 hours again in the morning, making sure there's no heavy wind or rain or something like that. And then you just kind of extend it, and then you start to introduce them gradually to the afternoon light. And then after a week of you know, out and in, you start to, as long as the overnight lows aren't too bad, you leave them out overnight, and they usually, by the time you transplant them, they're hardy. They're ready for it. If you were to just basically take them from your house, don't harden them up and put them right outside, it will probably work, but the plant is going to be shocked. And the plant, you know, it's going to kind of not grow for a little bit. It's going to look really sickly for, you know, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, and then it'll start to grow after that. And then you know, you're starting with kind of slightly less healthy plants than if you you know, kind of properly harden them off. So definitely want to do that.
What is the temperature at night so that you can start planting? Like
If
above
it's
10 or
if it's a hot crop, it has to be above 10, double digits. If it's a cool crop, 4 degrees is your lower threshold. Some can go lower than that, but I'd say 4 is just a safe one where all of them go. So what I would do, if you're doing this earlier on in the year, start your beets and onions inside. Put them hypothetically just kind of up here. Plant them in early April. Harvest them, you know, sometime maybe kind of late June, and then plant your cucumbers in the same spot. And then instead of kind of trying to squeeze 3 things in, stack them. Cucumbers are normally 60 to 70 days from when you always direct seed those. And then basically 60 to 70 days. So you plant those, you've harvested these two, you plant those in late June. You harvest those at the kind of end of August, early September, and then you could hypothetically plant beets and onions again, or you could plant something else. But what you want to do is succession plant, and get kind of a temporal element to the to your garden plan as well, because what you're trying to do is not just grow what you want, but you were trying to grow more of it.
Diversity. Too.
Yeah, and what we've got here is we've got a great mix of cool crops and hot crops, of sun lovers, of shade lovers, of part shade lovers, of heavy feeders, of light feeders. We've got the diversity here, so now it's just going to be a case of using it in your plan.
Potatoes are.
They're considered a hot crop. They can withstand a light frost.
Okay.
So whereas some of these I say plant in early April,
Yeah.
Potatoes I wouldn't plant until the last week of April. But they're they like full sun, but they can stand some shade. They're pretty flexible. They like heat, but they can stand a little bit of cold. But still don't get them out too early in the year.
You mentioned cucumbers grow late June. If I already have a cucumber plant,
Me
so
too.
what should I do?
Because it's early.
Yeah,
early
you could
and
get
late.
away
Should I
if
keep it inside the house and bring it back?
oh, it's a seedling.
A seedling,
so
I
it's-
bought it already.
Okay, yeah.
It's big.
Don't plant it yet because Tuesday night and Wednesday night it's going down to 4 degrees. So that's going to shock the plant. So start hardening it off and then plant it next weekend. Just know that
with things that are already planted.
if
You
it's
can
gonna frost.
cover.
yeah,
protect.
cover it. Like if you can do a cloche, a cloth,
You can buy
just something
those
like that.
Fabrics from.
Yep.
for-
If it's in a
gardening.
container, if you can move the container close to your house and just elevate it on steps or something, just keep it away from the frost. It's still going to get shocked, but you can't. Once it's planted, it's you can't really move it back into the house.
And make it hardy.
Yeah.
I just
Tough
put
enough.
eggplant this morning, so oh god.
Okay.
Oh, no.
If it's a cucumber, just know that it's going to send out its tendrils soon. It's going to start to try to grow upwards. So you might need to put just a small stake or something, just to let it survive indoors for one more week. But you just don't want to. It's going to be some cool temperatures this week. So.
Same thing as tomato.
Tomatoes are a little tougher than cucumbers, but I still recommend waiting until at least Thursday, maybe Friday.
Yeah.
Next weekend is
And
even
so
safer.
with climate change, how do you know there's going to be this time when it's going to be perfect?
Yeah.
Like, after a certain time, it might some weird dip.
I
in
always wait till
February.
Victoria Day. That's it.
Yeah, for the hot crops. Make sure your cool crops you want out in April though, because it's if you were to put your arugula or something something like that, or cilantro out at the end of May, it's going to look wonderful for the first month, and then it's going to start to try to bolt on you. So the hot crops though, Victoria Day is just a great guideline. It's an old school guideline that still works, but again for hot crops. Cool crops, put them in sooner. And
Only herb I plant is basil and your coriander.
okay, yeah, coriander can go late
Yes.
April, so it's a tough one.
So in this bed,
Mhm.
for example, tomorrow I wake up in the morning early and I plant the beets and the onions.
Yeah.
Then I let them do their thing for the remainder of May and June. Then at the
And
end of
late
June.
July, they're normally 60, 70 days.
Well, what about the cucumber then? So it's
Oh, sorry. This was if you started earlier, you'd put those in
Yeah,
April.
if I started
and then,
early.
And then
But,
do
Okay.
cucumbers.
Yeah, but given now, you
Plant
could
it
do
all.
the opposite though. You could put the cucumber in. If it's a seed, you could plant it now. If it's a seedling, wait a week.
oh wait.
Put it in now, and then basically harvest it in 60 or 70 days, and then put the beets and onions,
Doesn't the
or just
cucumber
fit them all in side by side.
like a plant that sort of goes up and the cucumbers come off it? Or is it on the ground?
It's in the squash family.
Yeah, it's in the
It's
squash
a
family, so
trellis
it,
or a
it's in the ground and you
viney
trellis it
thing.
upwards.
Yeah,
Well,
so
and-
that means you have all the ground space to grow the other things and the
That was my
cucumbers
yeah.
above it.
That was
Yeah.
my
Or
next
behind it.
question.
Got them
Like
together.
in this bed again,
Yeah.
we could put the
Cucumber.
seedlings at the back and then
Yeah.
still something at the front.
Yeah, preferably a light feeder like an herb or something at the front. Cucumbers are susceptible to things like the cucumber beetles, squash bugs, that sort of thing. So it's good to put, let's say an herb or something at the front. You wouldn't want to put a medium or heavy feeder at the base of the cucumber because they're going to start to compete for nutrients. But a light feeder, preferably an aromatic light feeder,
Okay.
and that's going to do wonders there.
Okay.
And then that's called layering, where you, if you know plants grow high, especially tomatoes are a great example because they not only grow high, but you're also pruning the
Cutting off
leaves
the
off the
leaves.
bottom.
Yeah.
You create all of that ground space. Now the tomato plants they're voracious competitors for nutrients and water, so only light feeders can go underneath them. But I would, early in the year, I always put, let's say my tomatoes are in a row, on the south or the west side, again factoring in you want late day light, I'll put carrots and or onions would be my go-to. And on the north or the east side, depending on the orientation, I'll put lettuce, I'll put herbs, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then what I try to do is by the time the tomato gets big, I'm harvesting the beets and the onions, and then I just let the tomatoes have that side of the bed on their own. But at least at first, I just want to use that space. I don't want just tomatoes and just something else. I always try to kind of layer it by height. So I think that does it. What we can do is, for those who are able to stay around, I think what we can do is just do kind of some quick mock-up of seed starting indoors and seed starting directly into the garden. Place them with something. So I just want to start some of those plants now. So basically I'll use these kind of Lee Valley ones for that, because these are low maintenance. I just fill the reservoir up with water. I only have to check on them every few days because I'm busier out in the garden. I use these for that. I don't use them for my first flush of
And
seedlings.
you don't have to take this outside, you just put it inside?
Yep, inside. You take them outside at the end to harden them off, to get them used to the sunlight and the temperatures and the wind. But yeah, at first you just put them inside, you just kind of water in there, and then the water gets wicked up through here. And then I'm sure, basically, I'm sure, they're already telling you that when you're pushing the plug there, that's one of my favorite parts.
Yes.
So, because
Yes, this is beautiful.
yeah.
Grow lights provide UV or not?
Yeah, I basically am a big fan of using a lot of grow lights at home.
Okay, so my plants that I did in grow lights will transition better outside.
Yeah, grow lights do help. Plus, they make your seedlings indoors more healthy, which is good.
Yes,
so it's good.
Yeah.
Just make sure you're aiming for on your grow lights. There's kind of two elements you're worried about. Number one is the strength of the light. And so you want to make sure for leafy greens or young seedlings, you're looking for a minimum 20 watts per square foot.
Okay.
So count the grow lights that you get. There's going to have they'll tell you how many watts there are per bulb,
Right.
and you just want to make sure that as basically they cast a light,
Right.
you're getting you want them pretty close to your plants,
Yes.
and you want 20 watts
Yeah,
per
I
square
just
foot
have
minimum.
one with little strip, and then you put the seeds straight on there.
Oh,
The
okay.
plants look
Yeah.
I
okay.
have a little
Oh.
one LD, like L,
LED, yeah,
Right.
you
because
prefer
they're
that.
not as hot and the better
Yeah.
on electricity.
They'll still kick some light out. The other thing, if you're just growing seedlings, just get full spectrum. Don't go for that kind of red light, blue light type thing.
Yeah,
Just get a
I don't know
simple
what
full
it is,
spectrum.
but
Yeah. If you're
so
growing
right.
full plants indoors, then
Yeah.
you can get more specific. You get the right spectrum. You can get something called kelvins,
Yeah.
where if you're growing basically fruiting plants, then you want kelvins at around 3,000, 3,200.
Yeah.
Leafy greens about 6,000.
Yeah.
But if you're just doing seedlings,
no,
just
no,
get a
so,
plain full
yeah.
spectrum, 20 watts per square foot. You're good.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
So no problem.
This is an apple tree.
So, and then did we want to demo just? Have you guys all started seedlings? Okay, so all we're doing in this one is basically there's two soil blends you can use for starting seeds. There's your basic seed starting mix, and there's potting mix. And the difference is seed starting mix is largely comprised of two ingredients: one of perlite or vermiculite, and one of coir or peat. And it's just kind of one of each of those. And the coir or the peat that serves to basically gives it a soil-like texture, and it retains the water.
Okay.
The perlite and the vermiculite that's there to provide oxygen to the plants and
So
just
you
kind of
don't need a
lightness
lot of
and soil.
nutrients.
Not at first.
Okay.
Because there's nothing in those two ingredients that has really any nutrients at all.
Too
The
much
peat
for
will
the
have a
little
little bit.
seedlings, right?
Yeah, it doesn't hurt the nutrients, but the problem is they don't need it. So when you're just starting seedlings, you have to be aware of what are you feeding, and so if you've got nutrients in the soil when the seeds just start to germinate, they're not eating any of those nutrients. They have about 3 weeks nutrient supply in the seed itself. So you know how seeds are like they're healthy for us to eat. That's because they've got the nutrients inside, and that will support the seedling for 3 weeks after it germinates.
Wow.
So before they germinate, like in order to germinate, they only need two things: moisture and the right temperature. That's it. And then as soon as it, when it first germinates, it'll send out what's called a radicle, the first root. Then at that stage, it then needs oxygen.
Okay.
Then the next thing, it sends out those initial 2 leaves. Now it needs light. Still doesn't need nutrients. And then 3 weeks after you see those 2 leaves come out, then you need to add nutrients. So the benefit of seed starting mixture is that it just gives
is
you.
that Miracle Grow?
This one, yeah. So it's just what they had here. So it's not necessarily organic.
But it's enriched with something in it. Miracle Grow is not good for your plants, I think.
Yeah, well, there is organic. There are organic Miracle Grow products.
Oh.
So I'm okay with it. It's not my
Well,
first
that's
go-to
organic.
brand.
Miracle Grow. You know what? That's just greenwashing, I think. But it doesn't matter. We'll just go with the flow.
But go with the ingredients that are in it. So if it's got chemicals, or something like that, they worry about. But if it's just got, perlite and peat moss, which is what this looks like,
fine.
that's fine. So we're good in that. If you did add nutrients early on, or if you use potting mix instead of seed starting mix, potting mix has those same 2 ingredients, plus it's got compost. And the fear is because the plants don't yet need the compost, you might be feeding the algae, you might be feeding the fungi. It's a little less sterile, and you're creating risks. So the benefit of using potting mix and not seed starting mix is you don't need to add fertilizer 3 weeks down the road.
Okay.
The detriment is that it's not sterile. So you really need to get your watering right, or you're going to get different fungal diseases like damping off, powdery mildew.
So organic potting mix is not sterile.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
It's but it's so I use organic potting mix usually for potting up. Once the seedling grows, and if I want to put it into a larger pot, then I'll use the potting mix. Usually I use just seed starting mix for just the seeds, and then I'll get a liquid or an organic liquid fertilizer, usually something that's got a little more nitrogen. I'll dilute it, whatever the bottle tells you to use. Cut it in half because you're putting it into delicate seedlings, and then basically I'll dilute it, and then I'll give that to the plants about 3 weeks after germination, and I feed it from the bottom. I don't want to pour it onto the leaves themselves. Basically, you want to feed the soil, not the plant, because the plant is pulling the nutrients through the soil, not through its leaves.
Only organic.
And then by this paper, you can draw the water out.
Exactly. This is just kind of it's a wicking cloth. So the water is held in the reservoir underneath, and it just wicks up. And the benefit of doing that is it's never going to have too much water. It'd be very hard to overwater this. Whereas if you get your typical trays, the black seedling trays with the cell inserts inside, you can actually overwater those, and you can have your plants growing in essentially just kind of wet soil.
I tend to keep my seedlings quite moist.
Yeah.
Is that because I find, the ones I have at home now, which are 4 different things, they're in the window, and I keep them wet, and but in the past I've had them sit in puddles of water.
Yeah, they do need water, but the problem is they also need oxygen. Once they start to grow, they need oxygen. So all that
but
water
I'm
is
talking
pushing
about
out the
little
oxygen.
guys. I'm talking about things that are bigger.
Oh yeah, well they'll still need oxygen. They can get some oxygen
Oh, I
from
see.
the water.
And if it's too wet, there's no oxygen.
Yeah, like tap water itself has 6% oxygen, but if they have access to more oxygen, they'll grow that much faster. So what you're doing is you're making sure they stay damp, which is good. But if it's too damp,
I just
we're
judge
pushing
by
out
the
oxygen.
leaves and the condition of the plant.
The lower leaves will turn yellow. You'll get something, just kind of a nitrogen deficiency over time. If the plant can't pull in, if the roots are kind of drowning, they kind of go into dormancy mode. And you get nitrogen deficiency. So you just have to be aware. Let it, especially as the plant matures, let it slightly dry out before you add water, and then during that time.
Slightly dry out. Good.
Yeah, because plants, they like cycles. They like they photosynthesize with water, which they need, but then they respire, which is what drives kind of cell activity with oxygen. So they like cycles. That's why if you looked at a plant closely, you'll see plants grow more at night. Because during the day, they're photosynthesizing when there's light out. They get access to light, water, and carbon dioxide at the same time. They're photosynthesizing. Then at night, the light goes away, so they don't need the water anymore. So they switch to respiration, and they're pulling in oxygen, combining it with the carbs that the photosynthesis made, and they grow. The cells divide. To start this, all you want to do is basically just kind of fill these up with your seed starting mix. And normally, if I'm doing this on a larger scale, I will actually wet the seed starting mix before I put it into the tray. because we still we have to make sure we're planting the seeds into a damp soil. And what the peat moss that happens to be in this one, it needs to be what's called activated. Like picture when you got a brand new sponge and you add water to it, the water just runs off at first, and then as it starts to get damp, it soaks it up.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's going to be the same thing with peat moss. It won't.
So you just spray water, let it wet moist first before you.
Yeah, I'll put it in a bucket, and then I'll basically wet it in the bucket, and then when you can get it to kind of that right kind of moisture where if you can take the soil in the bucket and you can make kind of a snowball, like a mud ball with it, and it holds its shape, that's perfect. Whereas if it's sopping wet, then you've got too much water, and if it doesn't hold together at all, then you need more water. You just want it to just kind of hold. But just for if you're just doing kind of one seedling tray, then what you can do is you can essentially just water it afterwards, but before you put your seeds in. If you were to put seeds in before, like into the dry soil, and then water it, your seeds are going to float to the top. So basically, you don't want that. You lose your perfect depth. So you keep adding seed starting mix, and what you're trying to do is just make sure that everything's tamped down. You don't want any large air pockets in here, because air pockets are dry pockets, which basically, given that the two things that seedlings need to germinate are moisture and temperature, it has to stay constantly moist. So you just keep adding it as long as it'll accept it. You can never over compact seed starting mix. Like soil, in the ground, you can over compact, but this you can push down. It will not over compact. Yeah. So you're good there. And now what we want to do is add moisture to it. So to do that, it's a bit of a stepped approach. And I'm going to take it away from the table just for cleanliness. And again, you're trying to activate the peat in here. So you just give it a little bit, and then you wait. And then, because it's not going to be consistently wet. If I were to kind of put my finger in there, there'd be wet spots, and there would be some dry spots in that. I need it to be all evenly wet. So wait just a little bit, and then a little bit more, and then we'll wait just a little bit again. And there's going to come a time where water starts to come out the bottom. Not yet.
Oh, okay. Not yet.
No. So the third time, though, it should take. Now we'll let it soak through. And
you say earlier I can soak the soil before?
Yeah, if you soak it in a bucket and then you transfer damp soil, that's the way to get it perfect. Here we're just kind of depending on the water to just percolate through and be even. But you can see most of it, but there's still a few. I failed on just a couple there. So we'll give it just a little bit more, but then we're kind of good. And I'll do it mostly around the outside where it wasn't soaking through. And then once you've got it to this stage, now you want to put your seeds in. Depending on the type of seeds, let's see, what do we want to plant? Usually when I'm talking about planting kind of succession plants, I'm usually looking at things like lettuce or onions. For the onions, if I'm doing bunching onions, then what I'll do is basically that you plant them in bunches and then you transplant them outside in bunches. So you normally put them in bunches of 10. If I'm doing regular onions, what I'll do is I'll I'll just kind of plant them, and I'll put maybe 5 or so in here, and then when I go to transplant them, I'll tease them apart and then plant them individually. So bunching onions, remember, you seed them as a bunch, then you transplant them as a bunch, then you harvest them as a bunch. They stay together, and you'd normally put them in plugs of about 10 or so, assuming about 8 of those survive. Regular onions will do a little bit less. For onions, you don't need to, normally for a lot of seeds, you're used to kind of dibbling, putting the seed in, and then pinch and pat. Onions, you don't need to do that. They just need to be, just kind of, you can kind of what's called broadcast them.
Sprinkle them.
Yep.
Wow. And lettuce, you could do that too, no?
Yeah, lettuce you can do it, arugula you can do it, spinach you can do. You don't need to. These are coated seeds.
Oh,
So basically, onions, things like you see this with onions and carrots a lot as well, and then sometimes lettuce as well. They'll put a coating on the outside, and this is still organic.
Yep.
But they'll put a coating on the outside. The purpose of that coating is to retain the moisture. because they need to stay constantly moist. And so basically what we'll do is we'll just kind of sprinkle, let's say these are regular onions, so about 4 or 5 for each one. And again, you're gonna tease these apart. If I accidentally put 6 on, it's not a problem. No, if I put 20 on, it would be, it's not gonna work out so well.
And then, so I guess just because there are so many different words for things, bunching onions are green onions?
Green onions or scallions, yeah.
Ah, okay, I get it. And then I heard they grow back and back, right? The bunching on.
They grow back in, what's that?
They are perennial.
Bunching onions?
Self-seeding, maybe.
Yeah, you can sprout them. So they don't, they won't kind of, renew in that regard. But what you can do is you can take the bottom of it, and you're not going to get a new bulb, but you'll get a new leaf, like, or multiple new leaves. So that's called sprouting onions, and it's a way of just getting more out of the same onion, which is obviously always a good thing. The ones that are truly perennials, where they come back, is green garlic. It's in that family. So instead of harvesting the bulbs, you harvest the greens, and then you can basically just get that's just going to come back year in, year out.
Okay.
So it's similar to ramps.
Oh, ramps are so great.
Can you grow ramps rather than keep picking them in the woods? Are they just a forage
They're
thing?
difficult to grow. I'm sure. So I've never done it. I'm sure it's possible, but I do know it's difficult. They're really, they like their natural environment of being kind of on the forest floor.
I could take a few.
And then what you'll do with these, you just press them in. And then normally when I'm at home, I'll put something like vermiculite on top, where it's basically just something, onions like darkness. So I'll put that on top. Oh, do you have vermiculite? Yeah. Oh wow, you're prepared.
What is it with vermiculite?
It's the those
Lava.
little pebbles that are
From lava?
like it's it's,
Volcano.
like this
From
is
a
perlite,
volcano.
which is these white things are perlite, which is very related. And vermiculite, yeah, it's just kind of, it's a stone that is mined and heated.
I didn't know. I thought those ones are plastic.
Oh no, it's an actual very, very, very lightweight stone. And then what I do is basically to retain moisture and to create a little darkness for the onions, I'll put vermiculite on top. And vermiculite is incredibly lightweight. So basically the seedlings will germinate and it'll have no trouble just punching through this layer.
How come you didn't put another layer of soil on top instead of putting this one?
This is going to be a lighter weight.
Lighter weight than this.
Yeah, and this will, it sits on top of the soil, and what it does, it keeps things dark, and it reduces the evaporation of the water by covering it up
Do you do this
from
one
the soil.
for all type of seed or just onion?
I personally do it for all types of seeds,
Okay.
But you only, onions are the ones where it's most recommended, because most of the other seeds you're dibbling it, you're making a hole and then putting it inside and covering it with the soil, whereas onions, and there's a few others like lettuce and arugula and whatnot, because you're just broadcasting them on the top, this is better.
Same as the lettuce?
Yeah, lettuce.
Does that get all
This
mixed
year I can
in?
grow lettuce.
Is that gonna get mixed in?
Nope, it's just going to sit on top, and then when I transplant it, it'll fall onto the soil at that stage when I put it outside. But it stays on top, and its goal is just moisture retention for the most part.
Oh, cool.
But so what we do is we do that, and I don't even, if you've got this on, you don't necessarily need the humidity dome. So the textbook is just the seedlings that you broadcast on the top. So onions, lettuce, spinach.
Seeds.
Arugula is better. Yeah, the ones that you bury, you don't need the vermiculite.
Yeah.
But having said that, I actually prefer vermiculite to humidity domes. Humidity domes are better at holding humidity in than the vermiculite, so that's good. But what humidity domes are bad at is as soon as if let's say this half of the seeds germinate first, then I've got basically 12 12 sets of leaves here that are looking for sunlight, and I've got 12 sets of seeds that are looking for continued moisture. So now what do? The humidity dome is great at retaining the moisture, but it deflects the sunlight out. So I'm then I have to kind of choose, do I want to kind of focus on this set of seedlings or this set of seeds? Whereas,
what if they were intermittently that way throughout?
Yep, which could totally be the case.
Yeah.
Whereas the benefit of using vermiculite instead of a humidity dome is it stays on for you know, for those cells that still need their moisture, but the cells that do germinate, you know, initial embryonic leaves are going to punch above the vermiculite, and they'll have access to full light. There's nothing blocking it. So it's just you know, it's a way of when you're doing things on a kind of a larger scale, it just makes your life easier using more vermiculite and not bothering with the domes. But I understand most people, if you don't trust yourself to water every day or to check the water, the dome is safer.
But you're definitely right. One of the drawbacks that I noticed was if stuff starts to germinate at different
It gets
times.
real leggy real fast.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
But,
okay.
so I'll keep this on just to transport it home, and it doesn't hurt to keep this humidity dome on for a few days. But the second any one of these germinates, take that off, because your vermiculite is still doing the benefit of most moisture retention.
So it tells you on the package what a broadcast seed is.
Yeah, it'll say on the package.
Do you, what are they in
broadcast and
general?
pressed
All
into the ground.
lettuces, onions.
Yeah, I do it with lettuces, onions, scallions, and arugula are the main ones that I broadcast, and then certain types of flowers.
Okay,
But most of the larger vegetables I will dibble and
like
bury.
you're talking about nasturtiums. What do you mean by flowers?
Oh, nasturtiums
like
I will
real-
bury because they've got the larger
big
seeds.
thing,
But certain types of flowers I know I've
like
just-
flowers.
like
that you don't
cosmos
eat.
I will just broadcast onto the soil, and usually I'll just broadcast and I'll just kind of gently, without stepping in the soil, just tap them into the soil with either the rake or just with my toe. And you know, so just different types of things. But now the goal of this is, you know, if this was March, this would be your, you know, you'd be planning ahead for your, you know, initial spring planting. But now it's May, so what we're doing is now this is our succession planting. Where by the time these are ready to go, you basically, these will take place. The first thing I harvest out of the garden, I've got something that's half grown
That's what you
or
want
a
to
third
do.
grown.
I find in the summer, if you have a small garden, you want to eat lettuce all year round, you have to be super organized.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you've got the period it's growing. It might come up twice, and then you've got the long period before.
Feast to famine to feast to famine. You can stagger your plantings, where you put the plant a small amount of lettuce every 2 weeks, and then you can direct seed it at that time, and that will achieve the same thing where you're harvesting this first, then that, and then
go back to the first. Wow.
Yeah. So, but this is just easier to just have
I
some
need quite
seedlings.
a bit of elbow room for it to grow up to be able to eat it. I mean, to have enough for one meal. And maybe that's getting the hang of how much you plant at once and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, this lets you plant it all at once, and then you got your second planting all ready by the time the first one comes out.
Great, I
And
like
usually when you can do the cut and come
So
again,
you could do. I see.
you'll
do
get
that.
yeah. You'll be harvesting. The
All
first
year
one will take
summer.
40 days to get to the point of being harvestable. Then basically you'll be harvesting it normally for about 3 or 4 weeks. You'll be just harvest it every week. You'll shave it down to 2 inches or so.
Yeah.
And then let it grow up from the middle again. Shave it down, and then by the time that cycle's over, second batch is ready
And
to go
that's
in.
inside the house.
Yeah, this is just sitting here waiting to go outside.
Oh,
So you just get just a flow of new
yeah.
lettuce plants in. So
Cool.
yeah, so that's that, and it's similar. You know, we can have a different conversation about you know, direct seeding into the garden as well. But you know, the most important part of planning your garden is just having your actual plans ready to set yourself up for success, but also having the seeds and seedlings ready to go into the garden. And the more you can have in a mature seedling form, just the quicker it grows in the garden. You know, because the most expensive part about gardening is the real estate. So you want to basically just kind of maximize what you take out of it and minimize the time.
Area if you know what you're doing, even on a balcony, technically.
Oh yeah.
Or even in those, things indoor things where you plant all this stuff. Like any. Are you? Do you have an email or something to be available? Or
Yep.
do you have a Facebook or?
Yep, I can either give you my I'll give you my email and or social media right afterwards for sure.
Okay.
But it's yeah, you'll get me at just kind of Homestead www.homesteadto.com.